Please, if you could start by remaining standing for the Karakia. Hau ki te uru, whakatakata hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina kita, kia mā taratara ki tai. I aki ana te atakura. He tio, he hoka, he hau, ti he. Thank you all. Please take a seat. Now, do we have anybody apologies? Because I don't see a full suite.
No. But I don't have apologies.
I'll do for lateness there. Okay, that's okay. Right. I have apologies from Councillor Paul for lateness, so I'll move those. Seconded by Councillor O'Neill. Thank you. We can put that. Vote, please. Eventually. Is it working, or if we take by hands? Apologies here. What we're going to do is do hands, are we, or are we about to go? 1 second? 1 second, 1 second, guys. I'm sure this one will pass. Right. Done? Okay, right, please.
Voting is open.
Voting is now open. Thank you. Councillor Young. Thank you. Good. Because of course she's not. She can't vote for this one. Yes, of course. Right. There are no announcements by the Mayor. Conflict of interest declarations. Are there any? And this is only in relation to the council meeting. No, I see none. Items not on the agenda. There are no items not on the agenda. Welcome, Councillor Wolfe. There is no public participation. And we will then adjourn the meeting till the conclusion of the infrastructure meeting. I'll adjourn the meeting until the conclusion of the infrastructure meeting, and I'll hand over to Councillor Rush to chair the infrastructure meeting. Oh. Yep.
Well, welcome everyone to the second meeting of the Infrastructure Committee, and thanks everyone who has come from the public to support local democracy. Much appreciated. We've said the Karakia, so we'll move on. We are live streaming. Let a democracy advisor know if you intend to leave the meeting. A cup of tea at 10:30, and moving on to the agenda. There's any apologies? So I did have an apology from Councillor Paul. I believe, did I hear that? Councillor Wolfe is here, yes. So I'll move that amendment be accepted, seconded by the Mayor. All those in, well, do we need to vote? Yeah. Please vote, folks. And that's been carried. Okay. Sorry, there are no items on the that are not on the agenda. We have got 2 public participants, so really looking forward to hearing from them. Oh, the minutes, yeah, sorry, folks, I forgot about the minutes of the last meeting, so I move a motion that the that we approve the minutes of the Infrastructure Committee meeting held 23 June 2021, having been circulated, and they be taken as read, confirmed as an accurate record of that meeting. Do I have a seconder? Councillor O'Neill, thank you. I now put the motion. It was moved and seconded. Those in favour press 1. Welcome. Thanks for the apology. Now, interesting nuance that the receiver for these things is down there. So although it's tempting to poke up there, actually it's down there. So that's been carried. Okay, so let's move on to public participation. I'd like to welcome Bill Harding. Bill's come from Taupo to speak to us about the Brooklyn wind turbine. Bill, are you here? Yep. Bill, you've got 5 minutes, which will include time for us to have a few questions for you. So it's can be ideal to leave that little bit of time. We've seen a few of your emails, Bill. So yeah.
Thank you very much for your time. I'm an electrical engineer from Taupo and have concerns about the way the operation of the powerhouses are concerned in the Wellington. As part of my work energies, I come here today as a representative in August who has spoken to the truth through the centuries. I'm here today to specifically ask you to join me to accept those needed changes, as my own destiny is here to change the present direction of the world's energy by having only the needed synchronous stable versions and formats. The platform I shall utilise as a journey of discovery is by using the recent manifestation and actions taken recently by Meridian Neil Barclay in declaring that the lone Brooklyn wind turbine may never be operable again due to the windy Wellington moisture penetrating the electronic printed circuit board. As members of the Wellington City Council, you will all have been well aware that over the previous years my concerns with regards to the turbine dirty, useless output, and this concern now exampled by the City Council executive team by inviting me here today, of which I was appreciated and hopefully enlighten you all to discover the very ugly and concerning programs being instigated against the New Zealand consumers of electricity. It gives me no great pleasure to expose this very wide coverage of corruption and scams that is now commonly accepted and uninformed innocent sheeples, being now perpetuated by those with many official warranted responsibilities have initiated misinformed directives towards other agendas which does not provide the environment for the general well-being of the New Zealand citizens' future prosperity. This has been graphically highlighted recently by an article published by the reporter Matthew Tissot in July 25th copy of the Dominion Post infrastructure section under the caption "Weather Stalls Brooklyn Turbine." This action summarises and expresses the perfect example of implementing the corruption and scams being developed within the New Zealand electrical power system in collaboration with the assistance of the New Zealand Wind Energy Association executive members, the Minister of Energy, Honourable Megan Woods, via the technical and operation portals of Transpower New Zealand and the Serious Fraud Office, who is supposed to be leading the agency for investigating and prosecuting serious complex financial, including bribery and corruption. I can now even include the Ombudsman and New Zealand Environment Court within the specific frame of reference. All these political members have been openly challenged in the past and have failed in the warranted duty to provide any official protective examples for New Zealand's electrical consumers. What is now realistically preempting and implying by public consumption is that this Brooklyn turbine may never ever revolve these blades again due to produce any dirty energy. This operational technical emergency utterance is all for the part of the Meridian corporate members to not be inspired to ever tell the truth. There has never been any ingress of moisture from day one, as these wind manufactured external motors are designed specifically to operate and withstand very arduous environmentals, 100 metres up in the air. The Brooklyn Turbine contract certificate, WDC classification, asynchronous motor degree of rain protection classes importance by a Meridian PRO, Anne Breedy and Dominion Post Matthew Tissot. Statements now got to be questioned, which has now proven completely false. Ethically, operationally and technically completely untrue, which has become part of the blatant misinformation that Meridian Energy keeps supplying to them in public. This subjective discussion is for profound national importance by causing unwanted hardships across many discussions of the society, and I have identified and claimed that corporate Meridian is devious and dishonest by expecting such acknowledgement from the editorial of the Dominion Post. Why Meridian chose to format to enlighten the Wellington public that has now become a wake-up call to the WCC members is entirely all to do with the $20,000 offer to the CEO Barclay with a request to prove to the Wellington City Council and the consumers that this turbine could actually produce the 230-volt sinusoidal waveform-shaped legal synchronous current through a very simple isolated experiment.
You'll need to wrap up soon, Bill. 20 seconds.
Thank you. Sorry?
You've got a little bit of time here, so yeah. You've got 20 more seconds. We'll give. Okay. All right. Thanks for that, Bill. Did anyone? Oh, there's not time for questions, so thanks very much. Next, we've got. Sorry, I didn't know this. I'd like to welcome Richard Allen, who's speaking on behalf of a group of NIO residents and businesses regarding the Three Waters asset conditions. Just a minute.
Thank you. Am I all go here? Yeah.
Yeah, so as a consequence, you'll have 10 minutes, but you'll need to leave some time for us to ask some questions, and I think there will be. Thanks for coming.
Now, I did leave some photos of the area that I'm going to talk about, just so you can see where I am. So, my name's Richard Allen. I'm a little bit out of my comfort zone here, but I'll do my best. I've come here today to advise you of a major issue with flooding in and around the NIO commercial area, something which occurs every time there's a significant weather event involving heavy rain. The main area of concern is adjacent to the roundabout, which you'll notice there at the intersection of Kandala Road, Ottawa Road and Awarua Street. Some of you will know the area, probably not, some won't. It's been a problem now for many years, and despite discussions and on-site meetings, which I've personally had and other residents have had, with engineers and officials from Wellington Water, the Wellington City Council and the Wellington Regional Council, with the exception of one improvement, there has been virtually nothing done to remedy the problem. The problem you can see is our house at number 5 Ottawa Road, and you just have to see how close the front doorstep the water came in the middle of July, and this has happened many times. For me, to describe why I'm here, I'm one of 4 guys, and we have, over the years, acquired land in the NIO Shopping Centre, and all the NIO Shopping Centre is under our ownership. We've got 2 properties in Awarua Street, and the 7 properties in Ottawa Road. All 4 of us have lived and worked in the NIO Kandala area for over 50 years. Personally, I ran the NIO pharmacy for 40 years, and I've had first-hand knowledge of what occurs when it rains heavily in NIO, even as far back in 1976, which probably a few of you weren't around at those days. I experienced what happened in NIO when it rains heavily for a long period of time. It caused major flooding and general chaos way back then, and not a lot's changed. 4 of our properties have either the Korimako stream or a 1.2 metre diameter stormwater pipe, which is a massive thing, on or adjacent to our properties. Our property at number 11 Awarua Street, I'll try and get the photo later, but I'll concentrate on what I want to say. At number 11 Awarua Street is a large pipe which carries all the stormwater from the top of Awarua Street, Ridvan Gardens, and a big development up at the base of Mount Kaukau. This pipe discharges into the Koromako stream halfway along our property. The force of the water emerging from the pipe during the July storm, which I personally observed, was unbelievable. It damaged an existing retaining wall and caused such erosion of the stream bank that we have lost approximately 50 cubic metres of our land. I'm also here to advise you of the major problems that some of our residential neighbours in Awarua Street are experiencing. One of those is here today in the audience. He lives at number 4 Awarua Street, and they have a neighbour at number 71 Kandala Road on the corner. They have a stormwater pipe that comes down from Colway Street up by Nenville Park, and it all comes down, goes into a pipe, and for various reasons, it goes under their property. It then goes under the Awarua Street and discharges also into the Koromako stream. Now, when in flood, the volume of the water in the Koromako stream is such that the water from the Colway Street stormwater pipe is unable to discharge into the stream, so it backs up, with the result that it blows off the manhole covers from the pipe in these two properties and floods the inside of the lower stories of both houses. Both residents have for some time been unable to use their rooms on the lower level of their house. At number 14, Axel's house, I couldn't believe it when he showed me the other day. The floor's concrete, and he can't put any carpet down on it. Hasn't been able to use the bottom floor of his house. In 2017, a report was commissioned from Opus Consulting by Wellington Water to investigate the reason for the flooding. I've got a copy of a nearly 40-page report. In a nutshell, it concludes that the Koromako stream, into which all the stormwater from a 330 hectare catchment area is discharged, it has no sufficient capacity to deal with the volume of the water it receives in a major rain event. And we already had 2 major rain events in the last month. It's clear to all of us who are affected in Awarua Street and Ottawa Road and the people using Cummings Park that by permitting the discharge of all the stormwater from this huge catchment area into the very small Koromako stream, the Wellington City Council has created a major flooding issue at peak rainfall times. Of note, the Kaunihera kindergarten is mentioned in this Opus report as being a possible health and safety issue. This report was 2017. And this became obvious in the recent July flood when the Koromako stream became blocked by logs. These logs had unfortunately been left by contractors to the City Council and also to New Zealand Rail, I understand, where they cleared on the side of a stormwater culvert down the length of Kandala Road after felling trees. They left all of the slash material, all the logs and things on the side. When the flood came, they all came charging down the river, and it blocked the intake, which goes under Awarua Street and into the Koromako stream. That first picture we saw before of the house is at number 5 Awarua Street, and we have a bridge, 2 bridges across to that over the stream which runs through our land, and there's one by the kindergarten and there's one down in Cummings Park. Each one of these was blocked, and it caused the river to change course and take a new route, and it demolished 2 boundary fences at the kindergarten, destroyed the whole of its playground, and caused severe erosion of the existing riverbank, which in turn undermined the foundations of one of our buildings at property at 59 Ottawa Road, which is adjacent to Cummings Park. I regularly receive call-outs from my tenants at number 5, a lovely couple of over 80 years of age who are terrified when the river comes up, and that's the one there, comes right to their front doorstep. I've got sandbags I leave there, but I have to go down and put them up because they're unable to lift them. In order to clear the logs from under the bridges on the properties to enable the stream to flow through, I at one point had to get out, blow half of my clothes off and climb in the ling, pull all the logs out, chuck them on the side of the river, and I was grateful for the help I got from one of my neighbours. Fortunately, no water entered the house, but we're pretty close. And being a good neighbour, I cleared the bridge at Cummings Park. From Cummings Park, the stream, which when it's in flood, it's more than just a stream, it's a roaring river. It goes down behind the Kandala Nio Library, through a large pipe, under the tennis courts, along Waihanga Street, and then down through Trilisic Park to the bottom of the Nio Gorge, We all saw the pictures of what happened down at the K Road commercial residence where 13 cars were destroyed. We as landowners, that's talking about the residents and myself, are fully aware of the requirement to keep the stream clear of obstruction where it runs through through our properties. When I heard the report for the Saturday, I think it was the 24th or 26th, something like that, or what was coming of the weather, I went down to check all of the properties and they were all clear. 5 hours later, it was chaos. After the event, I contacted the City Council and was directed to Downers, who told me the logs had indeed come from where I described after the tree felling, and that the Wellington City Council apologised for what had happened. That was it. There was no offer of assistance. I emailed the gentleman at Downers to ask if he would come over and remove the 3 stacks of logs that I'd got out of the stream. I've still yet to receive a reply. So I took a large trailer load of the tip to myself last week. Again last Sunday, when that howling southerly came through on Sunday, the river flooded again, without any logs this time. But the house at number 5 was again threatened. And hopefully those photos that have been flicking up give you an idea of what goes on. So what to do? My question is, when does a stream cease to be a stream and become a stormwater discharge system? So what to do? You can either stop putting the water into the Koramako stream, which is a lovely little stream, or you can pipe it. I've been told from the regional council lady, a very nice lady that came out to see me, that no way can you put a pipe. Can you pipe streams these days under the Ministry of Environment or whatever? However, you're destroying the stream anyway, so why not pipe it? You could put the pipe from the top of Aorea Street straight through Cummings Park down to join the pipe that goes under the tennis courts at the bottom of Ottawa Road. Take the one that comes down from Kaiway Street, put that through where the pipe is and join it all up, and everything would be fine. I realise it's hell of an expensive and it's probably not going to happen, but I felt I needed to offer some sort of reason for what we could do. And thank you for your time. I hope I didn't gabble too much.
Thanks, Richard. Does anyone have any questions? Councillor Calvert.
2 quick questions. First is, Nio's targeted for intensification. How do you think, with more homes there and discharging into the stream? Yeah.
Just interrupt. That's the Aorea Street site where we lost 50 cubic metres behind that wall, and the rigmarole to replace that under the rules of the regional council are incredibly ridiculous. Yeah. However,
the other thing is, you have had conversations with previously with representatives of Wellington Water and Wellington City Council, and you talked about some work being done in 2017. Where are those ongoing conversations at the moment?
Well, I become good friends with Mohammed Hassan at the Wellington Water Company, and he's a nice guy, and he takes pictures and we look at it and all we do is talk about it, and nothing happens. They did put a pipe across from Mr. Zivkovic's house at number 4, a bigger pipe to discharge into the stream, but I've already explained when it's in flood, physically the water doesn't go across, so it backs up and floods his house. Axel's come up with an engineering system to fix it, and hopefully somebody might listen to that. I mean, I'm a layperson. I'm not an engineer or a hydrologist or anything. I just know the place floods, and it has in the whole 50 years I've worked there.
Thanks for coming, Rich. Just to debriefing us about the July storms at this committee on the 9th September, and Nio will be top of the list. So we, as Chair of Infrastructure, I got calls all over the city, and we are trying to identify the hotspots that we know are hotspots every time this happens, and to systematically understand what we can do about them.
Thank you. Well, I understand that there's probably bigger problems than we've got, but if we don't speak up, we don't get heard.
Look pretty bad.
Thank you very much.
Here's Richard. Oh,
if anybody
sorry,
wants to trip around Nio, give me a ring and I'll give you a guided tour. Thank you.
Okay, so moving on to general business, item 2.1 on the agenda, Three Waters Asset Condition Assessments from Wellington City Council. Mike Mendonca to my right will be presenting this paper. We've also got support from Julia Alexander, Aidan Krim and Gary Cullen from Wellington Water to give us a bit of insights into what they've been up to in regards to our critical assets. Do you want them to come forward?
Yeah. Councillors, basically this is a presentation from Wellington Water. It's a follow-up from a presentation you received about 6 months ago when we started looking at the very high criticality assets. So Wellington Water are going to give us an update of what they have found and what they've been up to for the last few months. Over to you, Julie.
Morena Tefano. I'll hand over to Aidan Crimp, who will take you through the presentation, and we look forward to receiving your questions. We also have Gary Cullen here, who is our Manager Design, who can answer any questions you have on 7 Street.
Julie, can we just, we've got a technical issue with the presentation.
Right.
It's not time for a break, is it? So we'll just see if we can fix this quickly, otherwise we might have to go for an early cup of tea. I mean, while we're here, Julie, did you have any thoughts on the previous submitter, on NIO?
I'll hand over to Rob Blakemore, who's our Chief Advisor Service Planning, who is actually right at the forefront of working through all of the issues that occurred over the weekend of 17-18 July, of which were a significant event across the whole of region, including Wellington City. So, Bob, do you want to just perhaps make a few comments?
Yeah, I don't know if this is on or
Yeah.
I chair what's called the post-event response team, which when we have a major event gets handed to me to pick up the follow-up actions. In this particular event, there were 571 customer requests for action in that event, and we are working our way through a prioritisation process. Of course, the first priority we give are flooded habitable floors and commercial premises. There were 61 at last date of those in that last event. The event seems to be somewhere, we're having some trouble because of the variation in our rain gauge information, but around a 10 to 20 year event in this case. And at the moment, yes, the Awarua Ottawa Road area is certainly on that list of follow-up actions. And as the gentleman referred to, Mohammed Hassan, he's a member of our post-event response team. So we are currently working our way through all of the events. Appreciate that when we get responses, sometimes people understate their issue and sometimes they overstate their issue, and so we've got to take each issue one by one and work our way through. We've currently gone through 470 of those. We've got, I think from last count, we've got about another 120 to resolve in terms of actions. Those actions will vary from it's an operational or from no action because it wasn't an issue, right through to a major investigation and required to find a long-term solution. So bear with us. We are working away. We have a formalised process. It's a difficult issue, this particular event. It, as I said, a major 571 issues when we're trying to resolve these issues as we deal with everyday ongoing issues as well. So we are heavily dependent on our operations people to go out and work our way through this list.
Good. That's very helpful. Appreciate that. Time filler. So, Julie, back to the presentation. Very good.
So you will have seen the presentation, so Aidan will just whip through it and can take questions from there. Thank you.
Hi everyone. First of all, just like to say that it's really great to be invited along and be able to share what we've found so far. Obviously, we've still got a long way to go in our condition assessment journey, but we are really excited by what we've learned so far, and I'm really looking forward to being able to share these with you. Just as a quick reminder, the focus of this program is on our very high criticality assets. So those are assets in pipes of all 3 waters, pump stations and reservoirs for WCC, and we've also got treatment plants in other areas. And that's, broadly speaking, an asset whose failure has an unacceptable and extensive impact on the livelihoods of people and our environment, and where time to restore service would be greater than 1 day. So that's the focus of this program. It is very much the very tip top of the asset list. So I think it's around 7% of our, between 7 and 8% of our asset base is the focus of this program for WCC. you would have seen this detail before, but I was hoping, if I may, just to go through some of the specifics for each of these sections that we've found. We'll start off with some of the good news stories, and then we'll go into the specifics about what we've found and what we need to work on from here. And then, yeah, obviously happy to take any questions about any of this that you might have at the end. So to start off with, for drinking water pipes, the first thing you'll notice there is that there's only 7.5 kilometres of drinking water pipes in Wellington City. That's because of a combination of things, but there is a lot of built-in redundancy in our drinking water network, so there's actually only a very small amount that would cause a significant impact if they were to fail. So that's 7.5 kilometres out of 922. The most critical water pipes are the bulk water pipes that come in, and they're owned by Greater Wellington Regional Council. In terms of our drinking water pipes, the red section that you'll see in the top left corner there is mainly attributed to asbestos cement, which is past its useful remaining life. I think this is a problem that we're pretty well aware of throughout the city, and that includes our very high critical assets. So that's the main focus in the top left-hand corner there, is in addressing those. For wastewater pipes, so far so good in terms of our assessments. We have had some really good results in terms of a lot of pipes rated as good or very good. Our biggest area of concern, though, are in our rising mains, which also are the toughest to look at. So they're the ones like the Victoria Street rising main that burst recently, that because they're pressurised, we can't just shove a camera down nice and easy. We have to use a bunch of different techniques using special pressure pulses and the like in order to get a read on what their conditions in. It is worth mentioning, though, that that picture in the top right there would look a lot worse if it wasn't for the fact that the PS 1 to 7, the CBD rising main renewal was approved. Those were essentially all rated as condition 5 pipes, but because we have that funding to replace them, we don't need to worry about them for the purposes of this project. That's an example of a renewal that's going to be really helpful in terms of improving the overall quality. Yeah, and that's going to be starting pretty soon, so it's really cool that we're going to get in there, and that's dramatically affected the percentages in that graph in the top right. We had a good question in the question and answers from our councillors as to pipes that have a longer than expected period of longer than expected lifespan. Just to show you an example of one, so this is excuse the slightly grainy footage, and I might get a bit excited as well. So. This is a concrete wastewater pipe installed in 1900. A few of you might have seen this picture before. I think Alex Van Passen sent this through. So this is a pipe installed in the year 1900. Its condition grade is 1, as in very good condition, as in as new condition, and its next inspection isn't necessary until the year 2029. So that's an example. If we just look at our expected lifespans, this pipe would be past it, but because we've had a look and condition assessed it, we've found that this pipe's actually in pristine conditions. That's the importance of really keeping an eye out for these assets. I mean, this pipe's seen a lot of life in its time. A lot of things go on above it, and it's still going strong. So that's a really cool finding. In terms of our stormwater pipes, I think it's a bit similar to our wastewater pipes in terms of we are finding these essentially old geysers that are still going really, really strong, even into their 100th year. We did have some comparative data available for across the country for stormwater pipes, and we compared it with the trends that we saw in this pie chart here, and we actually found it matched up pretty well. So what we're seeing here isn't necessarily an anomaly. It does actually rate based on material and function with other parts of the country, is that these pipes are actually lasting pretty well, which is really cool. So onto reservoirs now. So structurally, I think the thing to reiterate is that our reservoirs are really sound. There are a couple of reservoirs there that we might need to do some works on. We're currently evaluating what works are required. It's possible it might just need some simple refurbishments. It's also worth mentioning that with reservoirs, our main concern probably isn't structural. Reservoirs have built-in redundancy. If we need to take one reservoir offline, we can usually feed from another reservoir, which is a really good feature of our water network, and so that gives us a lot of flexibility operationally. The main concern is around potential contamination, which I'll show you in a bit, and then pump stations. There wasn't anything really major of concern. Our probably main worry was around some of the access to the reservoirs, in terms of handrails and getting in and out of them. A lot of these reservoirs are buried and you've got to descend from a height. It is a little bit of a worry trying to get in and out of them, and that of course affects its operation, our ability to operate them. So we've looked targeting some improvements there. So far that was probably the glass half full view, but there are some specifics that we really need to look at and that we're programming in as we speak. So this is referring to, so in terms of reservoirs, so these are an example of some of the structural concerns we've got. So this is just some surface cracking on the outside of the reservoir, and there's a small amount of leakage there on the outside. As you can see, there has actually been some maintenance attempted on it before, and in this case it's proven not quite to be enough. However, it is worth reiterating is that there are maintenance solutions for these type of faults that can actually make a significant difference. So we've tried one maintenance solution, it hasn't quite worked out for us, so now we're going to go to alternative maintenance solutions. But as I said before, our main concern with the reservoirs is potential contamination. So these are pictures on the left-hand side. This is a picture of a reservoir. This is a very zoomed-in picture, but this is a gap in our reservoir sealant, which potentially allows any material straight into the water body in the reservoir. This is probably our main concern. If you end up with contamination of a reservoir, it's probably worse than if the reservoir just upped and fell down on the basis if a reservoir falls down, you can feed from another reservoir. If you've got a contaminated reservoir, there's no way you can stop it essentially or get it all throughout the network. It is worth mentioning throughout this process that we've got water testing programs throughout the city. Our water is chlorinated, so that provides a barrier, and we haven't found any specific instances of contamination, but I think this assessment has highlighted that these are some small, simple things that we need to just zoom in on a bit and really focus our maintenance on. Picture on your right there is pooling on a reservoir roof. This probably doesn't seem like a big deal at first blush, but if there is any potential cracking or anything in the reservoir, that water can just gush straight through and into our water body. So this is another thing that we're focusing in on our maintenance. There's special things that you can do with roof coverings and the like to help that water run off and not stick around to be a potential source of contamination. So yeah, the real focus for our reservoir maintenance coming up is definitely around making sure we can take care of that contamination risk. So I did mention before about some stormwater pipes that had lasted really, really well. These are some stormwater pipes that have not lasted as well. So these are two pipes that were picked up through historical inspections and then re-inspected. I think there is a good news story to tell here in the fact that, as you can see, even though they're cracked, even though they're in a little bit poor condition, they are still performing a service, they're still functioning. We've caught them in time before they failed and caused a really big issue, and now we can actually do something about it as opposed to reacting afterwards. So again, it's just another example of where condition assessment has picked up some stuff that we can now do something about using potentially a maintenance solution rather than a very expensive reactive repair, which is as hard as it is to say. It's really good that we found these poor condition pipes. It's good that we found them before there's a service failure. So that's those are the two main ones out of but I think our stormwater pipes we've looked at 45 kilometres, and there's a 100-metre stretch that we actually have to do something about. So that's really encouraging. The last point of concern is our network valves, and this has represented probably one of our biggest challenges around performing these assessments. Valves are usually operated on our pressure networks. For our assessment techniques to work, we need these valves to work, but what we're finding is that these valves themselves are in very poor condition, which is restricting our ability to have a look at our pieces of our network. More importantly, in an event or any type of failure, you can't trust operation of these valves in order to use them so you can effectively respond. So this has been a major find of this program, is the amount of valves that look like this essentially. What we're now looking at is trying to evaluate the exact extent of this problem. It's typically in valves that don't need to be operated all that often, but when you do need to operate them, you really need to operate them. So this is something that we're sort of evaluating and trying to find out exactly how widespread this problem is and putting a program in place to address them. It's possible that we might be able to just gently exercise these valves and get them back into operation, or we might need to look at a valve replacement. It is worth mentioning that typically, so for valves like this in our CBD rising main project, all these valves would be replaced anyway. So when we replace the pipes, we typically replace the valves as well, and that usually addresses that issue. Cool. So in terms of what's next for the program, so I think the focus is around the real focus is around maintenance plans. I think we've already talked through what our maintenance needs are for our reservoirs and valves, but we've also got maintenance activities for pump stations and pipes. Even the pipes that are in good condition still need to have maintenance plans, still need to have schedules for when we next need to condition assess them. Those assets that have been identified as needing renewal or repair, we're currently looking into. Again, because we may be able to implement a maintenance solution with these assets rather than just having to out and out replace them, because we've caught them before they've actually failed. And so we're just currently looking into what the best solution is that provides us the best outcome for Wellington City. It is worth mentioning that there is more inspection data coming in. This first tranche of assessments was based on 22% of the VHCAs being physically inspected. We're now at 33% inspected, and we're still processing that data by the day. The really cool thing is that we're actually being able to plug it straight into our asset management information system and be able to lift that straight out so that we can have really, really fast responsive analytics on what the condition of our network is, which is probably arguably the most important thing. This data isn't getting lost, it's actually getting plugged into our information systems and we can access it. So that's all I've got for you today. Obviously, if you've got any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. But yeah, first of all, thanks very much for your time. Appreciate it.
I really appreciate that update. Thanks very much, Adam. We do have a number of speakers. Councillor Fitzsimons, Deputy Mayor Free, Councillor Condi, Mayor Foster. Right, okay.
Councillor Rush, how do you want to do it? Because I've got a few questions. Do you want to give me, last time,
we've got a light agenda, I think. I think we should be rigorous and be thorough. And I've got a list of questions as well, and hopefully they'll all be answered by the time I get my chance.
Sweet. All right. Well, I'm keen to talk about 7th Street and what happened there, because obviously that has caused huge disruption to residents, and now there's another problem. And to me, it's just astonishing that could have happened. So I guess I'm keen to understand exactly how it happened, what's been learned from it, and how those lessons will be implemented.
Okay. So what's happened is that we've had a number of our joints welded joints have failed a quality test. So our quality tests on the polyethylene pipe are in 3 stages. So we make the welders do some trial tests before we start construction, so to make sure that their work is up to scratch and that the material is good. They all passed. Then during construction, we do commissioning and we do pressure tests. And the pipes are pressure tested to a much higher pressure than they would normally see while they're working, and they all pass too. Then the last test we do is that we can cut constructed joints out, and we send them away to the laboratory, and that takes longer. Obviously, that takes 4 or 5 weeks, and some of those have come back has failed. So it doesn't mean that they've failed at this point. The pipe's working fine, it'll work for a number of years, but at some point in the future, those joints are brittle, and there's a chance that they could fail. So it might not be for a large number of years, but it's better that we address it now. even though the disruption will be now, it's better than we do that. It's the right thing to do, I think, rather than wait for leaks to start springing up sometime in the future.
Cool. So what's the lesson learned and how will that be implemented?
Well, the lessons we've learned from the past with polyethylene is to have this rigorous process. It's more rigorous on polyethylene than it is on other pipes. The only thing that we would do differently is to have more supervision on our welders, but really we already have supervision on that. The processes are already in place.
But they failed.
Well, there will always be quality issues with construction, and that's why we do these checks, and to pick up those issues and then rectify them. And in this case, the contractor will rectify them. There'll be no extra cost on the project. It will still be finished on time because these repairs will be done in parallel. But there will be disruption to the residents. They'll have an extra couple of shutdowns, which will be 4 hours each.
Okay, and
some traffic management.
Yeah, some residents have said to me that they think that the contractors were rushed at the end because of the deadlines that were put in place by Wellington Water, and that's how this happened. What do you say to that?
No, I don't think that's the case.
Okay. Also, I've asked a bunch of questions prior to the meeting, and I'm just not very satisfied with the answers, and I'm just thinking about the mayoral task force and the fact that maybe councillors in the past didn't rigorously question enough, and that's kind of how we're in the problem that we're in. So, for example, I said... one of the questions is, what can Wellington Water and Wellington City Council learn from these mistakes in terms of procurement? And that's around the previous testing programs on valves and fittings, which is actually, this information came out before we knew about the 7 Street problems. But it talks about renewal programs have included the replacement of valves. Valve assessment replacement programs have up until now been largely reactive. Valve testing programs need to be upscaled, provided budgets allow for this. Now, that just leaves me hanging. Is it going to happen? Is it not going to happen? Where's the assurance? So I've asked all these questions because I'm looking for assurances. So now I'm thinking, should I do a bunch of amendments mandating that work to happen? Because it doesn't feel very reassuring.
Valves, can I talk to that? Valves, if you probably appreciate, if they don't shut, they're a pipe, and if they don't open, they're a plug, but they're not a valve. So either way, they must work. And so one of the lessons learned from this very high criticality assessment program is, yes, we do need to have a specific program on valve testing and valve maintenance. In our forward program that's been funded through the LTP for the next 2 or 3 years, we've got condition assessment. Valve testing programs will be part of that assessment program.
So why does it say provided budgets allow for this if it's already agreed?
Because we need to have, and the budgets have been allowed, because and that is a considerable cost up in the past. If you go through testing every valve, rigorously testing it, there's a valve with 2 or 3 valves at every street block. This takes a lot of effort and resource, and so we have to program that into our assessment program, and we have to risk-based it.
Councillor, we really want to talk to these guys about the high critical assets analysis that they've presented on. I appreciate Severn Street's important.
That's exactly... I'm asking the very question. But these are the questions that I sent through, and I'm just not satisfied with the answers to them. They're very, very light.
But there are other people, that's all.
Yeah, I did ask you this.
Yeah, I know, but I was...
Because my other question was around reservoir roofs, and you talked about the watertight issue, and you mentioned that in your presentation as well, but it talks about these inherent risk. These issues can be remedied through application of coatings, replacement or repair of sealant joints or minor modifications. Regular condition assessment programs will help pick up these issues. So is that going to happen? Are they guaranteed?
Yes.
Okay. And again, with the peer reviewing, is that, and the condition assessments not being one-off exercises, are they now embedded?
What happens is that as you do an assessment of an asset, the condition of the health of the asset that you find determines the frequency that you then come back at and do it again. So an inherent output of this program is to reprogram the subsequent assessment in future years. Depending on how far advanced it in its life cycle, it'll be more frequent. If it's in good condition, it'll be out in a further time horizon.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Condi. Oh, Deputy Mayor Free.
Thank you. Look, apologies if you have answered this in the Q&A already, but you mentioned there are drinking water pipes you've inspected, or the criticality is 7.5 kilometres out of 922 kilometres. Do you have similar sorts of figures for, say, the wastewater? You've got 100 kilometres out of. Do you have a rough figure of what we're looking at, the size of the rest of the network compared to the size that you've inspected, because it's high criticality, obviously?
Yes, we do have those figures. Sorry, I can't. I haven't got them right in front of me, but I'm happy to provide those. I believe it was somewhere around. So wastewater pipes was 100 kilometres out of just over 1,000.
Yeah, I mean, rough is fine.
Yeah, stormwater pipes is 80 kilometres out of, I think it was just under 1,000.
Okay,
from memory.
1,000 is fine. I just wanted to sort of scope the size of the problem.
Sure.
And how confident are you? You did mention it was quite tricky to kind of get to some of this, do some of this assessment. How much have you had to not do because you haven't been able to access? What's the unknown bit?
So it's pretty, for the pressure pipes, there's only been a small amount that we've been able to actually look at using our first technique. We have other techniques that we can then employ, so it's just a matter of working through which one's best for each application.
So is there still a lot that's not known, or are you confident when it comes to the high criticality assets, you actually know quite a bit now?
No, so yeah, we're only, like I say, we're only 33% through the inspection total that we like to get to, so we would love to know a lot more, but we have learned a lot. It's it's somewhere in between having absolute knowledge and no knowledge, and we're just trying to work our way along that.
Just make a point with water pipes, it's a particularly difficult issue.
Right,
so we're using a new technology which we've had to import from Australia and which we're trialling out. And failing that, you might be forced to go and physically dig them up and sample them and send them to the laboratory. A very expensive exercise.
Okay, yeah, that is very expensive and destructive too. You don't need to do it. The other thing I want to ask about is just your valve maintenance program. So my understanding was that there was a valve failure in Victoria Street when we had that gush and we had to shut the CBD down there, and that was because the valve wouldn't work to shut the. But I understood, and correct me if I'm wrong, there was some sort of maintenance program that was meant to be being done on that valve.
Like I can't address that. I can't tell you about that if there was or wasn't a valve maintenance program. I mean, I do acknowledge that that valve didn't operate at the time. Whether it was on a program that, and for some reasons, they couldn't get to it, or what, I can't answer that.
I thought it was meant to be being looked at on a regular basis. Can anyone else answer?
We'll have to come back to you on that specific one.
I guess what I'm looking for is some kind of assurance that if there is meant to be a program, how will we have oversight that things are being done?
What typically
especially in
happens
this
with
criticality stuff.
What typically happens with maintenance programs is that they are fed into an information system which generates works orders at a regular basis, and then they get checked off. So we have to develop an improved valve maintenance program. It's not been on the, there's been a lot that hasn't been done. We're only talking here about very high criticality assets, but the issue will apply for all valves. And so, we've just got to somehow work our way through prioritising those valve inspection programs. It's not an easy exercise to test a valve. It doesn't happen just by shutting it and opening it. You've got to do a lot of other testing to make sure that thing is working.
I'm not trying to say it's easy, don't worry. I've got one last question, and that's the sewage system has 70 connections to the stormwater network. Can you describe why we've got so many? Is that normal? Why have we got so many connections, and what's the... Can you just go into a little more detail about the risk there? Because it doesn't sound quite normal to have connections.
We have constructed overflows, if that's what we're referring to.
Sorry, 70. The sewage system is designed with 70 connections to the stormwater network.
So if it got overwhelmed, we could have. That's the only other opportunity. So there will be some parts of constructed overflow.
Yeah, if I can, Deputy Mayor. So that's in the second paper where we talk about these constructed overflows and the investment profile that's going to be required when we think about Three Waters reform. But yes, you're quite right. That is where we design a system.
Apologies if I looked. It's really hard online actually sometimes. But yeah, thank you for explaining.
Good. Councillor Condi.
Thank you. I'm just going to start with a question about the performance measures. So when we were, I'm the acting chair of the Audit and Risk Committee at the moment, and when we were meeting about that, it came up during our meeting about in the previous audit last year, we had some qualifications around our performance measures, and the committee wanted to know how well we've progressed towards sorting that out for this year's audit, and whether there was whether those performance measures are likely to meet audit standards now. And because that committee only meets quarterly, they asked this committee to come back to you and ask you that question.
So just to be clear, you're talking about the data for the renewals programs and for the levels of investment rather than the performance measures?
No, I'm talking about the performance measures that were qualified. So the water loss was qualified. Some of the qualifications were on the response times. There was a number of measures that, and it did include the renewal program, but that wasn't the only one.
So this program will only go so far because it's only looking at a specific 10% of the assets overall. So what you're talking about is a general overall lift of our capability around being able, and our performance management system, which we're working on. So I think we can give you more detail. I don't have all of that detail in terms of the improvements, Councillor Condi, but we can provide it for you separately if that's helpful.
All right. My next question is about just trying to get a handle for us about what Category 5 really means. Because I think there was a sense, and I certainly had the sense when I read it and it says Category 5, very poor. And my layperson's thing is like, oh no, it's very poor, we should replace it immediately. But that doesn't seem to be what it means, because the report you've sent us says these don't actually all need to be replaced right away. So can you help us to kind of understand what does very poor mean? Does it mean it needs to be replaced in the next year or the next 5 years? Can you help us to kind of understand that?
Can I give you the definitions for 1 through 5? Sure. So condition 1, very good, estimated at greater than 50 years asset life, and then depending on its age, we will inspect it at a higher or lower frequency. Condition 2, 30 to 50 years expected asset life. Same as above, we inspect it on a regular frequency. Condition 3, 10 to 30 years expected asset life. Condition 4, 3 to 10 years expected asset life, inspected at a higher frequency. Condition 5, estimated about 3 years remaining asset life. Investigate, see if you need to renew or refurbish. So that's what we're looking at.
Thank you, that's helpful. I think potentially going forward, it would be helpful for the committee to kind of understand for us within those very poor, where very poor says, okay, maybe you've got 3 years. If we could get some data about what is actually super urgent within that category, if there are things that you're finding.
Just one comment on that, if I may. Condition assessment has its limits, all right? And this is a one-off assessment. And so the rate of deterioration is what affects the urgency for replacement. And a good example would be the interceptor that we refurbished outside past the end of the airport, where we'd seen within a year a very rapid deterioration. So we do need to understand in a scale, this is not a one-off exercise. If we saw something really, really bad that we were worried about structural collapse or something, we would put it straight onto the replacement program and we'd be coming back to you very, very quickly. But there is a margin on these things. We can't accurately, and no technique will give you within a month its failure date. We are dealing with a band here, and there's a huge amount of professional judgment and experience that you rely on looking at this stuff. So this is all I can say, really.
Well, I guess what I'm saying then is to the extent that it's possible to unpack the very poor rating, I think the committee would find it reassuring to see so that we can understand that.
So a comment from me, we want to keep coming back to you. We want to build your knowledge as we build our knowledge as well. So that's our commitment to you, to provide that assurance and to make sure that you know what we know and what we're finding. We're working very closely with the officers. We'll continue to do that. We'll continue to keep coming to you.
I also have a question about, at one point we were talking about the wastewater pipes, and you said that the rising mains renewal work, because it's already been funded and programmed, meant that those pipes weren't showing up as very poor on this set of data, and I have to admit I found that a bit surprising. I wasn't sure why we would take them off the list prior to the fix actually being completed. So can you kind of explain why we would take it?
It's just that it's not on the assessment program, so it didn't appear on the statistics. You can assume that it's very poor.
I think what we can do is put them back in so you can get the full picture, because they were identified at the start of the year. We knew that there were severe issues with them. We wanted to come to the council, and we've accelerated that program. It was in your LTP over 10 years. We're committing to do it in 5 because it's such a critical part of the CBD.
We didn't need to assess it. They are very poor.
But those are very high criticality assets. Okay, so I think they probably should be put back in then, because we know that we've only physically inspected 33% out of what's being shown here, right?
Well, in that case, we have assessed those ones in the past, of course. We do.
Right. So they should. I think they should be in there. Full picture. Yeah. I do have some more questions, but I'll let someone else go on.
Well, it's tea time. 10:30. Yeah, smoko. So I think I think there's a number of questions to come, and if there are any questions to the team that can be sorted out over a cup of coffee, then I encourage you to do so. But we'll come back with more questions for the team in 15 minutes. 15 minutes. 10:45. That's effective. Now, Councillor Condi was asking some questions. Do you want to have a break and let the Mayor have a go and go back on?
I have one more if people want.
Why don't you do it? Go for it.
And you said that the data that we're seeing here is based on 22% of physical inspections, but I think the data is showing all of our very high criticality assets, and it's just 22% of that data includes physical inspections. Am I right? Okay. So can we see the data that's just from the physical inspections so that we can kind of see how those are tracking compared to kind of because the rest of the data is based on our assumptions. Is that a thing we can see?
So not from any material I've got prepared, unfortunately. Yep. What I can say is that for wastewater, stormwater, and drinking water pipes. So I guess first thing to reiterate, all the pump stations and all the reservoirs bar 15 have been inspected. So that data is 100% off inspections. The stormwater, drinking water, and wastewater pipes, the inspections that we've completed to date, did match the trends that we've seen in the data so far. So that was part of our reassurance around that we were actually on the right track, is that they are relatively matching it. Again, still early days. We're going to keep gathering the data and keep making sure that lines up.
There's also just a point that in doing this work, you've got the physical inspections to be done or to be done by contractors. We've put a lot of effort using our expertise into uncovering data that was never analysed, finding old records, a lot of stuff that we needed the expertise that we engaged to. What you do is you have a contractor do the work, then you have another expert to interpret it for you. Mm-hmm. We've used those people to do that interpretation as well of old data that we hadn't had the resources to analyse.
Cool.
So there's a bit more confidence there.
Yeah. So it would be, I think that would be useful for us to be able to see how that data's coming in and then where those confidence levels are. And then I guess my question is, like, when will we then be at 100% for very high criticality assets? And at that point, are we then going on to start the inspection of high criticality assets? Yeah. So
there'll be some assets that, for various reasons, we won't be able to inspect because they're 40 metres underground and have buried manholes that are 10 metres deep or something like that. So that there'll be some that we won't be able to do. Our aim is to get to as high an inspection percentage as possible by the end of this financial year. We're also taking the opportunity to be opportunistic about any high criticality assets that we can do at the same time.
So moving into high won't be part of this current AIDENS program. It'll be part of the ongoing LTP work that we do. And that program is currently under design to make sure we take advantage of all the lessons we've learned from this work.
Good. The Mayor.
Thanks. So, that was one of the areas which I've already discussed with Wellington Water about providing some information about what's going to be covered by when and what the future program looks like. So perhaps if you could actually tell us what you think the future program will look like, because this was a big one-off one-off look, but there's then the ongoing program of which we've allocated about $2.5 million a year. So what the kind of thinking is about what that looks like, how far it gets down into the asset system, and what it might tell us.
Can I just talk to the high criticality? If you think of a sort of a normal distribution, the amount of high criticality assets as opposed to very high is significantly more than very high. So generically, think of any water main that's in the CBD, any water main that feeds residential streets but isn't the residential street supply, any wastewater pipe that collects residential streets and takes it off. It's probably, and I'm guessing here, around 30% asset base. So that will take some time to get there. And bear in mind, this program is sort of roughly 10 million. We've got a $2.5 million program ongoing. So you can. And my lessons out of all this is to take advantage of try to build our in-house expertise, try to take opportunistic data when we can get it. There's a whole lot of lessons here learned that I'm learning. This is the largest program that's been undertaken in the country, and so we are learning as we go. As an engineer, it's fascinating for me, But yeah, so we will be moving into those high criticality assets. But as I said, one of the expenses will be this valve testing program we've got to design. So there's it's all going to come out of that $2.5 million, I'm afraid. So.
One of the opportunities that we did talk about is when other people are digging up roads. You know, as I said, the illustration I gave you was going past something in Taranaki Street where that was actually Wellington Electricity who dug it up, but there is your pipe exposed as well to be able to take that opportunity going, if you will, we'll have a look
to do that, we need to have the in-house expertise to establish those relationships, get out there on an operational basis and do that, as opposed to expecting someone who's doing the repair to collect that data for us. You know, it's a different expertise that we've got to build.
Yep, no, that's cool. And the last question is really that one which I think a couple of others have touched on, is just as we go through this process, presumably we get a bit of feel for what the actual life of the assets are. So you've given us an illustration of here's a beautiful pipe that still is 120 years old, still great nick, other pipes which aren't. And then, so what is that average expected life, and then the depreciation which we actually apply to that, because that's obviously potentially quite material.
As we establish the condition and the remaining life, that will immediately, all going well with our data system, change the life on the asset base. That will change the data that's used for valuation.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Pennant.
Thank you for coming in for all the work that you're doing. Can I just ask you to crunch this down for public consumption? Is this sort of good news? Are you saying that Wellingtonians should have some more confidence, or are you still saying it's too early?
I'll take that one, and I'll take it in the context of all the issues that were identified in the mayoral task force. So, you know, ageing assets, population growth, historical underinvestment, you know, all being recognised now by the council. Lifted your investment across the board in terms of renewals and in terms of investing in finding more data around the condition of the assets. What we found so far, we've made a really good start. What we found so far is there's some of it's good news, but there's still a lot to go. So yes, it's good. It's a good start, but there's still, you know, risks still sitting there, and we need to, you know, we can't shy away from that.
I think there's one thing we can confirm, that we were our worst. It doesn't tell us good news about asbestos cement pipes. It doesn't tell us good news about earthenware pipes. It doesn't tell us good news about old cast iron pipes. Those things still exist. We will eventually have to get there.
Okay. And do you think, now that we've increased your budget, you've got enough resources and in-house expertise to deal with some of the issues that we've been experiencing?
It's often not money, it's people. One of the issues we've found with this particular program is that there were the CCTV program, laser profiling program, which is the gravity stormwater wastewater pipes, there were limited contractors that could have the capability and the resources. And even when we engaged those contractors, we had a major re-education program, because there are new guidelines, new materials that have been developed. I won't go into the details, but there's that they had to be retrained, and they have been struggling. And so we are bringing in resource as we speak, but we are gobbling the resource, and it's around people and the skills to do that.
Okay.
If I can add, councillors, so in the next report we'll be talking about this a bit more as well. It's really important to understand the magnitude of the scale of the challenge we have in front of us, both in terms of the state of the current network and the expectations on us with the legislation that we know is coming. So I'll address this again as part of the next paper about Three Waters reform.
Okay. And last question, sort of following on from that, do you feel that Wellington Water is now starting to get onto the right track overall to deal with a number of challenges, bearing in mind that they are large and we haven't given you enough money in the past?
So yeah, just going back to my previous comment, it's a really great start, you know, and the lift in investment is welcomed, and you know, we're fully committed to delivering our program over the next 3 years and to focus on the right things, the most important things that we invest on behalf of ratepayers to get the best outcomes for the city. So yeah, good start.
Councillor Calvert.
Thank you. I know you were doing some work in Karori about cross-contamination of pipes between stormwater and wastewater. Was that part of this piece of work, or was that a separate piece? Okay. And with the with the government setting up a new national regulator around Three Waters infrastructure, is that something that are they operating that now? Is that something that how's that sort of tying into this?
It comes into effect later this year.
Okay, all right. And again, it's just on funding. We in the long-term plan, which we just passed, we put some extra funding in, noting that there would be a lot more, but subject to in part this work that's being carried out. When do you think you'll be in a position to be coming back to us and saying, look, we know this much now. You may not have all the answers, but when do you think you'll be coming back and saying, look, for the next 12 months, we want to be able to do this sort of work, or and we'll need some more funding? So have you got an indication?
Yeah, well, we'll be certainly coming back to you through the annual planning process. But in terms of where we've got to for this program, I'll hand over to Rob. But obviously, we're trying to get as much information as we can on these very high criticality assets so that we can put them into your considerations for annual planning, and also the prioritisation across the 3-year program that you've already committed to in that respect. So there's a bit more to do just yet. Rob, do you want to comment about
as I said, Aidan's work, and Aidan's my hat off to Aidan to run this program, major program, and I've just been sitting on the side watching him. So that's and giving advice when I can, but. The ongoing program, the $2.5 million LTP program for the region for condition assessment, we have to learn these lessons from Aidan's work and the program that he's managed, and we are developing a program for that work as we speak. It involves a whole lot of inputs, data, how we keep data, how we go, what in-house skills we need, how we can get resources, what other resources are available in the country. So it's not an easy thing. We hope to have that plan for that done by the end of this quarter, and then we will implement the plan for that for the rest of 3 quarters for the financial year.
And just one final question, just in terms of that, because obviously it can be, you could be calling on from time to time resources from across the country or even internationally. So how is the relationship with sort of like water care and those perhaps the larger water infrastructure council entities?
I'll tell you a strange irony. One of the experts that we have, I won't name them, but they're a very valuable consulting company, a very niche consulting company. They happen to have some of their work taken and their budgets taken away from them that were working with water care in Auckland, so we managed to access their resource. So we are fighting those resources. They don't have their resources either. These people are skilled and very niche.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, going to Councillor Day.
Kia ora. This is quite interesting. And one of the comments you made, Aidan, around pipes being 40 metres underground, that kind of made me go, what? How do you have a pipe 40 metres underground? Do we have many like that? How many do you think we won't be able to assess?
Not many, fortunately, but there are sections of the interceptor that are 40 metres underground, which is the very high criticality asset. So that's one that's really difficult to access.
It's number one of the assets.
Yeah. So yeah, that's particularly difficult. In terms of the overall percentage, I'm sorry, I couldn't entirely tell you right now. We're trying to track that with the inspections that we've got to date in terms of percentage that we have been able to inspect and percentage that we aren't. And so that's part of our next stage of our program, is we're trying to forecast out what do we think we can really get to in terms of accessibility.
But the gravity pipes are the ones that go deep, because pressure pipes can run shallow. So, so it's the stormwater and wastewater pipes that are vulnerable to be deep.
Okay. And just one other question. Do we now know where all the pipes are? Because I remember being told, a couple of years ago that some of the pipes, it was a bit hard to know because obviously the early pipes that were laid weren't actually put on maps. And do we feel we know where they all are now?
Around about 90%, isn't it? Confidence? I was going to say it's around about 9. It varies a wee bit, but we're constantly updating records as we find them. But it's around 90% confidence, I think, with those sorts of bases. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we've got Deputy Mayor free for a second time, and then I've got a number of questions, and I think we then need to. Oh no, we've got Councillor Foon for the first time. But then Deputy Mayor free, then me. I think then we'll finish it up because we need to move on.
My question, oh, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, my mistake.
Kia ora, and thank you, yes, for all your work on this. With the drinking water pipes, particularly around asbestos being in the 30%, so I'm going to say in the 3 to 10 year timeframes, I guess the question I have is around, health and safety risk there, and how are we going to deal with that in terms of urgency?
I can answer that if you like. Health and safety risk for asbestos cement pipes is airborne fibres. So the real risk is the people that are doing the work, and we take utmost precautions in that work. So any pipe that's removed is double bagged. It's always done when wet. There's all sorts of safety procedures. There's not a risk for carrying the passage of water in asbestos cement pipes. So yes, we take utmost precautions when we're doing the work.
And otherwise, it's the same process as you were describing, so you'll investigate the pipes, and if they're in need, then...
It depends. Don't forget, asbestos cement pipes make up 35% roughly of your water supply network in Wellington City. That goes down to every 100 millimetre pipes that are in residential streets and right through. So we are not assessing those pipes in this work, and it's unfortunate to say those are the ones that we probably will never get to, those residential streets, and we will be working with those as they fail. And that's the unfortunate situation. Testing asbestos cement pipes is possible, but you have to remove them, take them to the laboratory and put them through a CT scanner.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Free.
Yes, so for me, this has actually raised a lot of questions. Even the way the information was presented, I've had to sort of drill down into, whether the figures we were given were the total amount of critical assets or the amount which had actually been inspected. And it turned out that we'd only, you're working towards, got 33% you're working towards it. The question I'm getting to is, we got a qualified audit opinion because this information didn't appear to be as robust as it should have been. How confident are you that when we get to our annual plan or our annual report next time, that we'll be satisfying the auditor?
I'll take that one. We're doing the best that we can, Deputy Mayor, and at this point I can't give a confidence level. What we'll do is we'll come back to you. We'll keep updating you, and the audit process will determine. Make their own determinations, but it is our commitment that we want to get more information on the assets, and that's exactly what we're doing.
So I guess my point would be, please don't sugarcoat it for us. Please don't pretend it's better than it is. I want the actual information. I want it clear. I want what you haven't been able to do actually explained as well as what you have been able to do. I don't feel the report's as clear as it could have been. And I guess my other challenge is, how would you respond to this question? How do we as this group round this table do due diligence and good governance on the information and the processes that you're conducting on our behalf?
Yeah, thank you. We'll take your feedback on the clarity of the information, and we'll look to make sure that we improve that for subsequent updates that we give you. And obviously, the feedback's important, so thank you.
Good. So I've got a few questions, a lot less than I originally had, so thanks colleagues for asking a number of them for me. I guess I'm always minded about the adits and just making sure we've checked all the adits, and particularly the Thorndon adit, so that's been inspected and given an evaluation.
So we double checked that all the adits were on the program. I couldn't tell you specifically what their status is, but I can get back to you on that one if you'd like.
Yeah, that'd be great. And just given the experience of, I think it was Willis Street, and how the method that we used to inspect that particular adit, we missed some what we thought was gravel, but it was actually the roof of the adit caving in. So can you just maybe tell my colleagues, what is the methodology for inspection? Is it cameras? Is it individuals going into pipes? And when we talk about you've inspected, for example, a kilometre's worth of pipe, does that mean you've actually sent a camera through the whole kilometre, or have you taken a view that you've inspected enough to understand it?
Yeah, so I'll start with the simple stuff, which is any gravity pipes, we send a camera down. Sometimes the cameras have, depending on the material, special attachments, lasers to map out the inside the pipe. You've also got boats where you can actually float the camera. It does laser above the water and sonar underneath. That's what maps the pipe, which is pretty cool. The CCTV cameras that we've used now, like Rob said, we're trying to work to a higher standard of CCTV. So it's things like fisheye lenses, which have a better capture of the surround and a more robust process for quality assurance and making sure the camera goes everywhere it needs to on the inside of the pipe. In terms of our pressure pipe network, I'll try not to go too deep here, but basically you send a pressure pulse down the pipe and you measure the change in the pressure pulse at the other end of the pipe, and that indicates the condition on the inside of the pipe. Like I say, we've had real issues with getting access to the water column for those purposes. A lot of valves that are seized and we can't put the pressure pipes through, pulses through. There's also another technology called e-pulse, which is actually on the outside of the pipes, which is kind of like putting a defibrillator on your pipe and measuring how that electrics change. And then there's good old-fashioned pressure monitoring, where we just put pressure sensors throughout the pipes and just measure how it's performing at different lengths. So we're using a variety of techniques. Those are just our primary techniques too, by the way. There's a whole list of other stuff that we can do. So yeah, it's pretty...
Okay, none of them are fail-safe 100% though, are they? Or they have a pretty high sort of... I guess you wouldn't be using them if they were only a 50%.
For the best we can get.
Yeah, okay. And that's all we can ask. For me, I guess, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but this will be the third summer that I've been nominally in charge of the water portfolio. We've had 2 summers which haven't gone that well. We've spent a lot of money on asset assessment. When summer arrives, what sort of assurance will we be able to give to the CBD businesses and workers that we have done everything we can to understand our network and have some confidence, without being 100%, that we will avoid some of the issues that we've seen the last 2 summers?
You can try to do.
And you don't sugarcoat the answer, because I'm not going to go out publicly and make any commitments at all, but I just would like to understand where the team thinks we've got to.
All right. Cast iron rising mains like Victoria Street, there are more of them in the city. We need to replace them. They're all past their due-by date. Okay. End of story.
How many are
we're doing some. We've still got the Taranaki Street sort of collection up that way to do, and there's still Featherston Street to do at least. Not that many. I can't give you the data. I'd have to go back on GIS. Earthenware, stormwater pipes, such as Jervois Quay Crossing, have probably had their date. Some are good, some are bad. We've got to keep on assessing those. That one caught us by surprise. So in terms of confidence, because we've assessed the pipes, doesn't mean to say we've fixed the pipes. All right, and they'll only be, the public can only have confidence that they won't fail when we've fixed the pipes. That's all I can say.
Okay, well, thanks very much. Appreciate that. Well, what do we do now? I suppose we better move the paper. Yeah. Where is the paper? Yeah. Okay, so shall I move that we receive the information and note that further work is required on an ongoing basis? Do I have a seconder? Yep. Okay, Mayor Foster will second. Paper's been moved. Any debate? Amendments? This is how we work in the infrastructure. Whoop. Councillor Fitzsimons.
Look, I don't have any amendments, and I decided not to bring them, having drafted some, but I really just wanted to note that I wasn't happy with the answers that I got in writing, and I think that the debate was better, but actually I'm interested in making sure there is a strong record and that the papers are strong when they come out. And I agree with not sugarcoating, but I also want to see a plan, so I don't want to see problems just left sitting, and some of the answers to the questions I sent through were just sort of left sitting. I had no reassurance, and things like providing budgets allow for this. Well, have we or haven't we? Because whether Wellington Water and Wellington City Council have properly communicated about money needed is probably one of the most defining issues of the mayoral task force. So I'm pretty shocked to see, provided budgets allow for this, just sort of left hanging there. So just in future, I really want to see a commitment to the answers to the questions that we give. And I know sometimes you can't give the answers, but I do want to see a better and more comprehensive response than that in the future. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Calvert, and then Pennant.
Thank you. Well, I have a slightly different view. Look, I just want to thank the Wellington Water. It's delivering us bad news, but at least we're starting to get a much better understanding, and we are not engineers around this table. So I think it's also really important that our own organisation, the City Council, has enough resources to be able to ensure that we get provided the right advice or good advice coming from Wellington Water, so can test that, so that we're not acting as a QA over that information. So. And enabling sort of the right due diligence. You know, we've obviously there's a national regulator coming in, which is going to sort of make sure there are standards across the country, and obviously that will involve working more closely with Wellington Water. So look, I think there's a lot more work to do, but we've also got to make sure we don't do things in a very much piecemeal way. I'm not talking to Wellington Water, I'm talking to our council, that we do have a cohesive plan, and we understand what's being fixed when, and we understand what other things are happening around our city at the same time. We don't want to put a new cycleway in and dig it up because we've got to change the pipe or upgrade the pipe. So it's going to, and we all know that infrastructure is the key thing. So very keen to see that we do have a plan going forward. And all I can say is I'd much rather have a smaller and shorter pipe to Wellington Water than a longer pipe with lots of breaks going to some sort of other body that services half the country. Mm.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Pennant.
Yes, and just following on from that, this is highly ironic that we're having this session, because under the Three Waters reform we won't be able to. We'll be lucky if we have one representative. So I'd like to thank Councillor Calvert for making that point. Look, thank you, Wellington Water. I think it's good that you've fronted up. There is some good news amongst, and some sobering news too, and I think that's helpful for us to know that. And I think it's the fact that it's being done in public is very healthy. There's obviously lots more to do, but look, at least it has been started, and obviously Wellington Water was doing other good work before this latest tranche of work started. So I think it's quite healthy. There is accountability. Thank you, Councillor Fitzsimons, for holding people's feet to the fire. I think it is good. But a really, really worrying that we will not be able to do this, or Resource Management Act potentially work with all of this reform, that will be left to manage the local swimming pool. Kia ora.
Councillor Condi.
Thank you. Just wanted to say thank you. It's great to sort of see this first report back of the work that we've asked you to do. It's really encouraging to see that. I think we've had some feedback for you, but that's great. That's what happens with a first report. We get to look at it and we say, here's what our questions are that we still have. So, I think look forward to working with you on getting improvements for the next report, which is what, because there will be a next report, and that's how this is going to work. I think that's really where we need to be focused on, is how we, great start. I thought that was great wording, Julie, great start. And now we can work on what does the next report back look like and how we're going to build on this. So I look forward to doing that. And just thank you for the work that's been going on, Aidan, especially. It seems like this has been a really massively complex, much more complex than I think we understood when we ordered it, piece of work to get done. And it's really, really important for our city. So thank you very much.
Your Worship.
Yeah, look, I wanted to add my thanks to for coming along and meeting with us, and I did have that conversation with Rob during the break, saying that the kind of issue that Councillor Calvert has raised about the accessibility that we will have, and reflected also in the accessibility that we have to you, not just in this format but other forums, which we don't have for some other utility providers either. So it's just it's just one of those things. But I think that what we got here has been I think very informative. It's obviously it's a work in progress, There's a lot more to do. But I think what you're starting to show us is the complexity of even doing condition assessment, the number of different techniques there are, and also given us that we will never know everything. There are some things which are actually really hard, and we have to make some judgment calls on what something's going to be like in the condition it is. But it does help us a lot. And if this can feed through to, I mean, take the example of some of the pipes that you showed us the pictures of, Aidan. Here's a perfectly good stormwater pipe. If we didn't do an assessment process, we'd pull it out of the ground and go, oh gosh, that had several decades of life left in it, and that's a lot of money that we didn't need to spend. And similarly, others which might go, actually, we've got to deal with those earlier, but maybe we catch them early enough so that they're maintained rather than renewed, which again could be a lot cheaper. So if this leads us to a situation where the network can be managed in a way which is both delivers everything that we need and is more cost effective, I think that'd be a fantastic service for our city. And look, I hope just that this process has been an educational one, not just for us, but for anybody else who's looking at this, for the media, for the public, to go, okay, we see the work's being done, and we see there's more work to do, and we understand it better, and we understand the nature of what lies beneath better as well. I think it's really great, so thank you.
Right, I'll have a reply, I suppose. So from my perspective, I think what really came through, Aidan, I really appreciate that presentation, was your enthusiasm for the program that's going on and the use of technology. Wellington Water are doing exactly what this council asked it to do, and I'd like to thank colleagues around the table for supporting that. Also officers, of course, and ratepayers. So yeah, it's a journey we're all on, but I'm very comforted actually by the presentation that the early start, the technology and use, the processes involved are actually going to get us to where we want to get. So yeah, no popping of champagne, and no claims that nothing's going to ever happen in CBD over summer, but certainly in the right place. So much appreciated. So I put the recommendations. Please vote. Thank you very much. Okay. Moving to, I do have a speaking list somewhere, haven't I? Yeah, 3 rules reform, yeah. I know. So I want to use the work that Hayley put together. Okay. Agenda item 2.2, 3 waters reform update. Mike's going to introduce the paper, if you'd like to go.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Good morning, councillors. Appreciate that this is a massive deal for us. And this morning, just to reiterate, we're not actually asking you for a decision, but we felt it was really important to share with you what we have so far, so that we can start to socialise and get a feel for the general direction of travel. We don't have all of the answers. In fact, to be honest, we don't think anyone's ever going to have all of the answers. But it's going to be more about feel, and there's always going to be an element of risk with whatever we do. We do have 8 weeks to socialise, and today is the first chance for us to do that. We will be coming back to you in September with further information and asking you for, asking you for a decision, or that's yet to be determined. But there's more to come in September, so we're not going to try and cover off everything today, but we'll share with you what we can. Next one, please. Have I? Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. So just to remind, as you've just heard from Aidan, Judy and the crew at Wellington Water, our network is not flash. We haven't had any geysers or eruptions in the last couple of months, but it's amazing how quickly we forget, but our stuff is not in good nick. I also need to let you know, as is in the report, that our wastewater treatment plants are coming under increasing scrutiny for their performance, and that's a combination of things. One is the age of those assets, but secondly, increasing regulatory and public expectations around the quality and operation of those facilities. The other thing I need to point out is, even if reform does not go ahead, we need a plan B, and we will need to figure out what that is, what that looks like, and plan B is not the status quo. Plan B requires a whole bunch more funding, different ways of thinking about funding, and different ways of thinking about asset ownership. So what the government is proposing is that we are in with 20 other councils. Key thing here, as I know many of you will have picked up, is that the government has assumed, or the WICS, the Water Infrastructure Commission of Scotland, has assumed a 45% efficiency improvement if we adopt reforms. That's based on 2% efficiencies per annum over 30 years. That's a big call. It's one we need to look at more closely and come back to you with some advice on. I would point out, however, that there has been peer reviewed by 2 independents who kind of, generally speaking, whilst they have some issues with it, generally speaking agree with the overall tenor of the nature and scale of those efficiencies. But I appreciate that is a big open question that is being asked around the country at the moment. The other issue that is clearly front and centre at the moment is the governance structure. So a couple of things that DIA has actually asked us to think about. One is the question that has already come up is how will communities have a voice under this model? There is actually a consumer body. If you look closely, there's actually a consumer body here. But clearly, I think that is something that we need to think about, and that it will be a concern for communities and councillors alike. DIA has said that these entities will need to consult with councils on strategies and plans and things like the district plan, but exactly what that mechanism looks like and how that is done with 20 different councils is an open question, and DIA has actually asked us for any thoughts we might have on how that might work. So we are being asked here for our thoughts. It's not just a kind of one-way track. We are being asked for what we think about this stuff. The other issue just to talk about briefly is on the regional representative group. You'll see that this is 50-50 local authority and 50-50 mana whenua. The government has been pretty clear in a cabinet paper that is available online that this is about promoting Māori rights interests in water. So they've been pretty open about that, but that is a reason for the strong featuring of mana whenua in the governance structure. And just finally, and the reason that Sarah's at the other end of the table is this is a massive issue for all councils and their balance sheets. We don't know what that looks like yet. We're working on it, but just wanted to signal to you. Oh, and this, by the way, this is information that you were briefed on 6 months ago, so this is nothing new and nothing particularly just for this presentation purposes. There will be impacts on our balance sheet. We don't know what those are yet. We're looking at that, and we'll come back to you in September with some advice around that. Mr. Chair, that's all I really wanted to say at this point. I'm sure there'll be some questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mendonca. We do have a short list of questioners. Councillor Day. It's getting longer. Councillor Foon, Councillor Pennant.
Councillor Pennant, go first.
Okay, Pennant then Foon.
Kia ora. So I'm just kind of responding to what was also said in the last debate, just around the concern around loss of council oversight over water, in sight of the fact that the governance hasn't necessarily actually picked stuff up over a long period of time, which could suggest that the current structure doesn't work from a governance perspective anyway. So, but I'm just wondering, because in paragraph 9 it talks about mana whenua stating that they lost trust in the City Council, Regional Council and Wellington Water Limited, and that came through our task force report. And I'm trying to remember, were there any specifics around the things that were mentioned around loss of trust, financial oversight, or I guess just our general management of it? And also, what are we hearing around the country around tangata whenua feedback into their local authorities? Is it fairly similar sort of feedback across the board?
So the mayoral task force first, there was some quite specific things were recorded, and actually they're documented in the task force. Loss of mahinga kai was quite strongly worded. In fact, those words in the report are lifted directly from the mayoral task force. From a national perspective, DIA has been leading the engagement so far, and it's really important that we don't double up. If you think about Wellington, Ngāti Toa doesn't want 9 different councils coming to asking exactly the same question. So the regional council is doing some work on that as well. We're being really careful, and Karakia and I are very carefully monitoring and making sure that we don't overextend and don't get ahead of ourselves. So not resolved yet by any stretch of the imagination. There are clearly lots of different and strong Māori views on this issue.
But is the fairly clear message that the current system has let down the way that we look after our wai across the board?
Certainly in Wellington that is absolutely, and I think I'm safe saying that broadly that is also the case. Yeah. Trying to.
Councillor Pennant.
Sorry, Mike, can I just clarify, would each council have a representative on that body? Because there seems to have been a bit of ambiguity. No.
No, so it looks a bit complex, but the actual board of directors is a professional board of directors, and no, so the local authorities appoint a board that actually appoints the directors. So our direct influence is somewhat diminished.
So that the regional representative group, sorry, that's what I should have called it, this one here, would that have everyone on it? So the 22 councils, no. So how...
12 reps, 6, Manawhenua 6 from councils.
So the 22 councils would get together and decide who the 6 would be somehow. Right. And just following on from Councillor Day's question, fair enough criticism, but as I understand also that Māori have also expressed grave concerns around things like oranga tamariki at central government level, the benefit system, the welfare system. So what have you read that says that a centralised system will give more confidence than a localised one?
I think the mayoral task force is where I would start, and the clear message we had from our local iwi about what we have done to date.
Through you, Mr. Chair, can I also add that what you're seeing up there with the 6 Manawhenua representatives on the regional representative group is the step that DIA are proposing to provide more direct Manawhenua governance of water.
Few conferences on this in the local government zone 4, so where we had a presentation. So the philosophical idea that it will save more money is related to having more expertise that can be shared, having efficiencies in the procurement and efficiencies in the delivery, having more work, a more specialised workforce, and being able to have those workforce opportunities that you may not have in smaller entities. And whether that is enough to offset the disadvantages of lack of localism is probably a political debate.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think the only aspect that you've missed off from your observation is the fact that a water entity backed by the Crown balance sheet wouldn't be as constrained as all the individual councils to fund the level of investment required to meet the new standards, and they could deliver more at pace, because if entities were doing it in their constrained manner, you would have to do it you'd have to phase your capital program to be able to make rates affordable. So that's the other benefit. Yep. The faster you can do some of these things, the cheaper it may be in the long run.
And you're absolutely right, that point was mentioned as well. If you combine everybody's balance sheets but also have that backing, you can invest more than we currently can.
Councillor Phone.
Kia ora, and I guess what I'm reading and just hearing that we're gaining 45% of efficiencies, my question is around, is that financial and assets only, or how has there been any explanation of around other efficiencies regarding climate, ecological, water scarcity? And I guess I'm speaking to the measurements of what success looks like here. So that's one question, and the other one is definitely for Sarah. Just an example of if the assets are being transferred to the government's balance sheet, but yet we still own the assets, is what I'm hearing. So what's an example of where we're doing that, if there is one already?
So first part of your question, Councillor, with respect to carbon, yes. The cost of pumping water around Wellington is one of the biggest consumers of energy that we have. So that has been factored in with respect to how that might work in the future. I do need to be not sugarcoat, though, the issue with stormwater. So no matter who does stormwater, the interface between the stormwater network and the rest of our public and private assets will always be a tricky issue. So regardless of who is managing this, that is going to be an issue, the environmental impacts of stormwater quality and quantity, as we're seeing kind of every second weekend at the moment.
Through you, Mr. Chair, and on the asset transfer, I think that the term ownership is probably more aligned to guardianship, so the assets won't be on our balance sheet. They will not be. We will not be a financial shareholder. We will not receive a dividend. We will not recognise those assets in our books at all.
Councillor Gondi.
This is kind of following on from that. So, Sarah, can you... I'm really aware that the reason that we have to kind of come up with these arrangements to keep the entity at arm's length is so that we can separate our balance sheets so that the entity can borrow more and invest more quickly. But it is kind of a technical accounting thing to make sure that everyone understands. So can you just take us through why do we have to do that arm's length thing? Why can't we do a CCO? Why does that not work from an accounting standpoint in terms of freeing up that ability to borrow more? Through you, Mr. Chair, I think the only point of difference, and we are working through this at the moment, is the point of last resort in the new water entity is the Crown coffers. If it's a CCO model, there would still be, if we had actual financial ownership of these issues and Moa Point blew up and we needed an additional $200 million, local government would have to stump up with that money. In this model, the final support package and the risk sits with the Crown would be the only difference. But, sorry, just to round that out, note Mike's point around if water reforms do not proceed, we do need an option B, a plan B that is not status quo. And so looking at those types of models, where we have more asset transfer and a bit more flex in what we can do from a financial perspective would be the scenario we would be looking to develop. And just following on, why does that, so the fact that the point of last resort becomes the Crown rather than us, why does that mean that entity can borrow more than they could if they were as a CCO? Comparing the total revenue of the Crown, which is that lovely tax bill that we don't send out in paper form to you so you stare at it. It's the total revenue of that entity is much more. Their ability, you've seen in good times and bad, the surplus and the deficit that Crown create doesn't have a material impact on cost, whereas if our costs to borrow go up, then it has a material impact on rates because rates are such a small proportion, cost versus tax, central government tax, it's more noticeable.
Councillor Fitzsimons.
Yeah, I was just hoping that Mike or Sarah could just drill into this issue around expertise, because it was identified in the report that investigated the relationship between Wellington Water and Wellington City Council, and it talked about that we didn't have somebody operating at that level with Wellington Water that was able to, I guess, ask those difficult questions that governance certainly can't be expected to ask, quite technical engineering-based questions, and that it is quite hard to ask, and perhaps the council had decided not to go with that expertise. But I also know that the whole region has really suffered from the very small labour market there is for this highly technical work, and what opportunities the reforms offer in that area.
At the moment in New Zealand, I think we have about 4,000 people working in this sector. So under the reforms, the government's been quite clear that it intends to grow the sector, A, for economic benefit, but B, to grow the capacity and capability of the sector itself. Looking at growing it threefold to about 11,000 people, and that's everybody from people digging holes through to engineers, to address exactly the point that you're making, Councillor, about the lack of capacity and the really narrow bandwidth in this sector.
And my other question really is around these concerns around loss of control. And I'm just interested in your view about whether we really have control now, because it certainly doesn't feel like it. Like, we can get them here, we can ask some questions, but in terms of actually genuinely local control, do you see this as a major risk, and do you think that we have it now?
We definitely have, right now, yes, there are definitely split accountabilities between Wellington Water and Wellington City Council, and that does cause tension from time to time. I think that will be potentially be exacerbated under this model unless we specifically address that somehow. How exactly we do that, I do not know, but we're turning our minds to it. The whole country is turning its minds to it.
And just on my final question is around the issue around funding and using the Crown accounts. Do you anticipate, it's probably a question for Sarah, that it's more likely to be affordable for ratepayers to go through this reform process than the option B, which puts us at the heart and centre of what's happening?
So the advice that's coming through from the Crown that has been peer reviewed twice is that the efficiency gains, even if all of the assumptions underneath aren't potentially 100% correct and there could be a sway, they are all going in the right direction, that yes, there are efficiency gains through reform, and if you do it on your own with a regionally or a single council, it will cost Wellingtonians more money. And I'm not going to, I haven't done the detailed analysis yet to be able to argue with three independent opinions. Sorry, can I just follow up on the control question as well? So the points of control that you have with Wellington Water are a lot more front-end and direction setting. So you set the funding envelope through the LTP, you approve the capital program of the things that they will work on. I'm not sure how that would work in that model. However, the contracting relationship that we have with Wellington Water actually is one of no fault, and so to be able to contractually hold them to account at the moment, you have to end up paying for it at the end of the day anyway. So it's you've got more front end direction but less ability to make sure they deliver.
Foster.
I'm not sure that's any different from everything that we do, but in terms of we do the front end bits. But look, two questions I had. The first one of them is, because I hadn't picked that bit up before, the bit about why the entities can borrow a lot more, and I must admit I was scratching my head a little bit about being able to borrow a lot more because you've got a revenue stream. But actually, what you're saying is it's not about the revenue stream that the water entity will deliver, but about the Crown's balance sheet which sits behind it.
As the point of last resort. But so the work that the transition unit is doing within DAA right now is all about how do you structure these entities to ensure that they're the most efficient that they could be. So that work's ongoing, so I can't guarantee that it will, they'll have a better credit rating than us or not. What the impacts might be of the amount of money they need to borrow, that information will come out as they
that was
go
the bit
through
I was struggling with, because they will, a water entity will have some form of revenue stream, whether it's metering or whether it's whether it's some ability to effectively rate in some way on property. And I was struggling to work out how that would be a stronger, give you the ability to leverage many times more than a council would have. But I could understand it if you've got the Crown sitting behind it going, yeah, we'll pay if something goes adrift. Yeah, okay. And look, the other one is just 4,000 to 11,000 people. So at the moment we have a labour market shortage in just about everything under the sun. I'm just struggling to work out. I mean, if the idea of upscaling this is to do everything very, very fast, and it's at that scale, and you look at the pipeline of investment that's required right across the board, and if I pick Iona's Oranga Tamariki concept up, they've done a stellar job with managing, say, the education asset over the years. Is this real? I mean, isn't there massive risk? I mean, we know that we've got a risk delivering our capital program, let alone a capital program that the nation needs to deliver this plus everything else under. It just sounds.
So
like
I think
a
if
hell of
we
a
are
stretch.
consistent with our own narrative around if we build the pipeline, commit to the funding, the resources will come to the market and we can deliver. That's no different to what they're saying centrally. So I suppose some of it we need to understand the time frame that they're talking about. This entity is ramping up over many years. It's not going live from the end of this year. So I suppose it's about presenting that pipeline of work, the surety of the funding to go with it, and I don't know, procreation. We need to breed more engineers potentially. I don't know.
Yeah, goes back to demographic planning, labour force planning, and everything else under the sun. Right, good luck with them.
Sorry.
Councillor Calvert.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, no, Councillor Foon.
Oh.
Sorry.
Just coming back to that, like the efficiencies and innovation really, and the sludge project that we've just authorised and part of our LTP is a good case study. I can't see, or I guess I'd wonder, that was a political decision to pursue a circular opportunity. That project had other business cases that could have done the job, but not taken us to this next level. So I guess I'm struggling to understand, or I want to have confidence that these types of decisions will still be able to be made. And I guess in that feedback, that's something I really want to see this council pursue, which will come up in debate. But yeah, have the government giving any idea or indication that innovation for circular systems or, will be pursued as part of this?
Not specifically as part of this. It's a good point. Among our 20 colleague councils, there are some who struggle to put clean drinking water into taps. So it's pretty clear that's going to be the priority for the country. Understanding that the whole kind of genesis of this was the Havelock North water issue from 2017. So. It's a fair comment. I don't have the answer for you, but we absolutely know that it's a concern, and in fact the government has as well. So they're asking us, how will we work together to make sure that we meet the local needs of communities?
And Councillor Foon, I suppose we share those concerns, hence why we're looking at accelerating the sludge project, because of that innate concern that it may not float to the top of the list nationally. Oh, yeah, sorry, too many puns. However, carbon zero aspirations have popped in some of the information coming out of DIA as well, so it is one of the aspirations that they're hoping to achieve through the entity. I don't know how, and it's a good piece that we need to feed back into this process.
Councillor Bennett, do you have another one?
Very basic question. Mia raised it. What is the average age of most workers in the water space? Has anyone done any analysis on that?
Not for some time. I think it's in the 40s. It's actually quite old.
Oh, I thought you were going to say 60s. It's 40s is old now. Okay, so
for physical, it's actually quite old. Yeah.
Well, obviously there's different kinds of work. I mean, like particularly with the engineers who take the longest probably to train. Has any work been done into that?
Julie?
No.
Oh, Julie's just, no.
Mr. Chair, we can give you the age profiles for Wellington Water in terms of the different skill sets we have. I don't know at a government level whether anybody's done that work.
Well, I would hope so that they can train more people, right? Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Thanks. I think that's all I have on the speaking list. Oh, Councillor Foon.
Yes. I'll let.
Let's go. We've got another meeting.
Councillor Calvert. Then Foon.
Yeah. Okay. This question directed to our CFO, but some of the funding arrangements, is that essentially based on the structure that the government have in place around funding? I mean, they could change the rules if they wanted. You know, they could put in a different structure to help fund infrastructure. Is that the case?
So are you talking about our constraints?
Yeah.
Yeah, so why we're constrained. That is because of the founding documents and the covenants within the local government funding authority, which we borrow 95% of our debt through, the majority of our debt through. That's how we get such affordable debt. So, you could in a future choose to borrow more, regardless of the cost of borrowing. So that cost of debt, you need to think about the cost of depreciation. So that's the majority of the cost we're talking about. So the bigger your capital program, the higher rates to pay back that debt. And yes, interest might be higher, the cost of that debt might be higher, but the material impact would be actually what your depreciation funding is. The end of September paper that we're coming back and we'll have a lot more information on the finances. We're working with DIA tomorrow to do a bit more understanding, and Cabinet, I think I'm right in saying, have a decision to make about what that mechanism is for the negotiation for transferring the assets. So that's still to come.
So given that, alongside the Three Waters reform, we also have got local government reform, which is not really reporting back properly for a couple of more years. I know there's an interim report, and part of their brief is to look at funding mechanisms for local government. So is this, you may not have a view on this, but is this a matter that's being taken into consideration as part of this?
So through you, Mr. Chair, I sit on the advisory group for the funding and financing stream of local government reform. The first session that we had with DIA, the panel, and Ganesh Nana came along as well from Productivity Commission. It was very much in its infant stages of thinking, but the interplay between water reform, infrastructure deficit, that was all very much front of mind, but there's nothing firm coming out of that group for a couple of years.
And this one might be more for Chief Infrastructure Officer, but given the structure of how they've divided the country up into four parts, it looks to me very much based on the NZTA model. Is that been, like the regions? So I'm just wondering whether, is this been a factor? I mean, are we going to see sort of the country being divided up in this sort of way for lots of other things as well?
It doesn't actually match particularly well with the NZTA model, which has actually changed recently anyway.
Right.
They've tried to accommodate natural catchments and rohi as well, but it is by nature going to be a bit messy. In fact, you might have even seen on the map that there are some areas that aren't even actually finalised yet at the top of the south. One of the slides you can see there are some areas that we're still settling down. So no, I don't think so. In terms of your broader question about what's happening with sort of more centralisation of public sector activities, I prefer not to comment on that. But looks like
no, that's fine. It's a bit of political. Yeah, that's fine. Sorry. Yeah.
Councillor Foon.
Some of this question feels a bit basic, but I think it needs to be asked. Are you aware if the government did any modelling on just supporting councils with more money for their infrastructure? And three more questions: privatisation, safeguards. That's probably one of the main issues I've been hearing out there in some of the conversations and I guess questions around our procurement. We've formed a strategic procurement strategy, and this would be a massive spender. I guess these are the opportunities we've got to put forward to the government as well. Have the government indicated anything around strategic procurement as part of this?
Sorry, through you, Mr. Chair. When you said modelling on just providing funding to councils for infrastructure, do you mean for water infrastructure? I think the whole intent of understanding what the future pipeline looked like and that kind of affordability lens for councils individually, that would have been part of the mix. They haven't presented anything specifically around that. I mean, you will note that there will be some form of financial transaction if this goes ahead, where money would be provided for the assets and for a couple of other things that we'll talk more about in September. However, we haven't seen a necessarily overt direction from government that they're just going to go and hand out a bunch of cash to councils to fix the problem.
Yeah, the question of privatisation has come up a number of times and has been specifically addressed in the Cabinet papers with protections around that, so that it can't happen. I'm happy to forward you the Cabinet paper if you like to. Yeah.
And the strategic procurement question, so I suppose there's two lenses to that. One is they are assuming strategic procurement benefits to drive fiscal efficiencies, but you're thinking more of broader procurement outcomes. Yeah, so the government, it would be a question we could ask whether this new entity would be required to follow the government rules of procurement and sourcing, because there are some now broader outcomes being baked into those rules, so we can ask that question.
Okay, Councillor Free, Deputy Mayor Free.
So I've started taking a bit of an interest in this, and I think we all need to.
Yep.
We are in the middle of an 8-week period. No, but I mean, it's come upon us, and we have 8 weeks to get back to the powers that be with any questions we might have. And I think that's actually something I'd like to put on councillor only time, as a little brainstorming about what those questions might be. But the thing is, I think there is money. There's two tranches of money. There's no worse off money, where they try and look at, you might be in the middle of doing something and all of a sudden you have to stop that work. You might have employed staff and all of a sudden the system's getting disrupted. So there's that money. And then there's the announcement they made about a kind of a welfare lump sum, and ours was around 66 million. Yeah, but the question, I suppose, is, well, other people have been asking questions to which I did have a few answers. I guess my question is, how would they compensate us? Like in our case, we built our sewage treatment plant by selling capital power to reduce debt. But if all they're going to compensate you for is the debt, then sometimes councils who've actually paid and haven't got debt are not necessarily going to get compensated, and they may have sold other assets. How's that going to be calculated? And that's a good question to ask the government if you don't know the answer.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's exactly what that no worse off provision is for. So to work with councils who, through this, the normal approach may not come out as well off as the majority of councils will. So DIA have already reached out to us to initiate conversations around that, but that's something we haven't done yet. The process is starting, and we will come back to in September to give you that information.
So my question is, if we've only got 8 weeks, how are we going to get some of this information? I mean, I've only just started getting some of it through discussions with Zone 4 and what have you, but how are we going to get some of this information?
Yes.
It's 8 weeks that we've got for yes, for this first step, but it's an important first step. Please don't get impatient, Rebecca, because this is an important step that we're in, and what I'm asking is, it's only 8 weeks, how are we going to get the information we need for this important first step, which is our chance to frame...
I agree with nearly everything you say. Sorry, I just
Rebecca,
wanted to explain quickly that what I mean is that it's not like everything is happening within in 8 weeks. I just wanted to clarify that.
Thanks, Councillor.
And through you, Mr. Chair,
and I miss it.
The volume of webinars, Zoom calls, either with entity councils, with LGNZ, with DIA, with some of the independent reviewers, financial specific ones, infrastructure specific ones. There is a huge amount of work going on at the moment, and so we want to collate all that and be able to, and wait for the next cabinet announcement and be able to bring that back to you in September, so you've got all the information available. And that's partly why we wanted to come at the beginning of the process as well, so you're not just dumped with a huge amount of information at the end, that we bring information to you in an iterative format where possible, so you're kept up in step with the process.
Is that all the questions? So I've got a few questions, but very few. I just want to clarify, the no worse off sort of offer isn't one that allows us to figure out how we've lost out of this and expect a full check from the government. As I understand it, it's basically, here's $20 million, that's your no worse off payment. Is that kind of how it's working? Or is there a dialogue and a proper accounting?
No, I think we should keep our powder dry around what we say publicly at this point, because it will be a negotiation and we will aim to get the most out of that process for you.
Thanks. And just we've talked about the schedule, and as I understand it, the schedule kicked off, the 8 weeks kicked off during our recess. So, Mr. Mendonça, finally got it right. You'd think after 2 years of working so closely with Monk, he's been very polite. Can you just outline, I'm conscious that the next Infrastructure Committee meeting is the 9th September, so that's a month away, and after that we're going to be, as I understand it, legislation's being introduced to remove special consultation rights, expected to, and that the pace will pick up exponentially from thereafter.
So government is considering what the process is going to be, so they have not made any decisions on cancelling consultation or anything like that, but they're looking at the options and will come back to us with some idea on what that will be later next month.
Sorry, I thought the cabinet minute that you referred to earlier approved the paper which outlined the minister's preference to come up with a more streamlined process that was fit for purpose for this particular process and this process only, and would be time limited.
Sure, but it's not exactly the same as not having a consultation. Yeah, still being designed.
That's the direction. Yeah. Okay. All right, well, I think it's been a great Q&A. This is probably, we keep on having these records, don't we? If it wasn't COVID, now it's the Three Waters, and then next it's going to be the LG Future sort of thing. What a time to be on council. Anyway, so I'm happy to move this paper. I believe there is one amendment. I'm going to move it with a pro forma amendment, which as we've been discussing, it struck me that this could well be suited for a working group. If I'll speak to it, I'm not. If colleagues aren't minded to do that, then that's fine. But I will continue working it myself then. I just thought that I just wanted a broader number of people. So anyway, I think in terms of the paper, the idea of aggregation I've always supported. I've always said the devil's in the detail. We do note that this is coming at us very quickly, and we'll be doing our community a service if we are fully up to speed, understand, and are able to get voices from all around the city and indeed in the region. So I'll be looking to take a leadership role on that at some point in some manner. But do I have a seconder? Councillor Connie?
Okay, cool.
You're going to reserve your right?
Yeah,
Would you like
I'm happy to reserve my right at this point.
Okay, so is there any debate? Yeah, and is there an amendment? Amendments, I know there was one circulated last night. We got it? Yeah. Would you like to speak to this, Councillor Calvert?
Yes, so I will move this, and I understand Councillor Pennant will be seconding. And I'll speak to the substantive as well. I mean, we know 8 weeks to, for us to get our heads around this. I know we've had some briefings, but more and more we're getting a little bit more detail coming out. We're also hearing commentary from around the country as well, where others are looking at this, because this is not just Wellington region, it's right across the country. I think most people, if they haven't by now, they should have a look at the Mayor Westland's YouTube video, where he explains his perspective. And I just want to say I was at a local government meeting a couple of weeks ago with the representatives from around the country, and there was a lot of concern being expressed by both urban and rural councils about the proposals on the table, and noting that there was a lot of information still to come as well. And so it's trying to be able to draw all that together. I know the government's offered us 66 million. It sounds very nice, but 66 million to spend on whatever we want is not actually great. I'd rather them actually give us the money that we've actually requested for other things, like income-related rents, but that's another matter. So I'm really concerned that they're doling out money where they want, but not where it's actually necessarily needed in some places. I know DIA have been asking us for feedback, but already they're out promoting their views in the public, on TV, on very nicely crafted ads, very one-sided, might I add, from my perspective. I understand sentiments for the reform, but I have to say, you look at, we've had reform around electricity, and we ran out the other day in the country. We've had governments controlling state housing, and we've run out of state housing. So not enough. So look, I just think this is an interesting proposal. The picture that we've been presented about the governance and management structure, honestly, I mean, there's so much leakage in all those lines. There's bound to be. It's just, it's not going to. I have real concerns about whether that will work. And of course, we've heard about capacity of getting the numbers up just into the country just to build the infrastructure, and we still have a housing deficit. So I'm going to move these amendments, noting that there's still information to be received, and we'll still get. But we need to understand that this is within the wider context of RMA reform and local government reform, which seems to be coming afterwards. So it's almost the cart before the horse. I'm also asking officers to come back to us on what a public referendum would need, because we're hearing a lot of call from our communities, right across, not only in Wellington, but right across the country. And I don't know whether anybody else around here, but I've been getting quite a few emails and comments about, we should ask our communities what they think on something so significant that's going to impact the future of this area, and also that's in line with and thank you, Councillor Rush, for noting that what was in the cabinet paper, where the government was strongly indicating that they didn't want to see us going out for they may not want to see us going out for a special consultative process that we would normally do, like we did on the library, that they would change or amend legislation that means that we could easily push something like this through. So it's important that the public have a say on such a fundamental change. So these amendments are really just noting some key specific information, and also asking officers just to report back on the steps that if we decided to have a public referendum, what might that look like? And for officers, this is not this is an outlining of the steps, the timeline that would be required. And as I said, Councillor Pennant will be seconding.
Would you like to reserve your right? Okay, we've got a question from Councillor Condi to, I'm guessing, the mover. for officers. Yeah. Please do. Yes, please.
Sarah, we might need you back at the table as well. I don't know if it's yours or not. My first question is, in number 8, it asks for us for a public referendum on the matter. This might actually be Beth. Hi, Beth. Is there any mechanism in the Local Government Act for us to hold a public referendum? I just am not aware of any legal right that we have to do that.
No, that's not my understanding, but I believe that that would be through DIA, so we'd probably see some legislative change in order to enable something like that.
Okay, so it'd be more not Wellington City Council holding a referendum, but trying to encourage a national referendum on the issue would be the only...
Yeah, that's certainly my understanding.
That would be the only role that we could have at that.
I mean, we could enable consultation or engagement.
But that's not a referendum.
But I think, as noted there, the most formal mechanism we have of doing that is a special consultative procedure, which has been noted as not adequate. So,
yeah, can we maybe get a bit more understanding of around what the cabinet minute actually said in point 7? Because it does. My understanding of that minute was that they agreed that we shouldn't be having 77 different special consultative procedures across the country, and that it would be useful to have some legislation, but that they wouldn't preclude us. So my understanding was, for example, that we will need to do an LTP amendment, which is a special consultative procedure. So I don't see that. I guess I'm not seeing those two things as being inconsistent, that just because we go to legislation, we can still do a special consultative procedure. Can you just demystify that for me a little bit?
I think the thing is we don't know. And what we know is we're sharing with you. And we know that this is a really significant decision that's going to require community engagement, high level of community engagement in my view. Normally, if it was just us, we would absolutely be doing an LTP amendment and an SCP as part of that. The issue is, as the government has said, is they don't want 77 SCPs, and so we're waiting to see what that would look like. It will obviously require some form of legislative amendment, I would imagine, but we're waiting to see, and we would love to know, trust me.
I mean, I could offer I read the cabinet paper actually it might have been early this morning, and there are two key barriers identified. One is the LGA requirement or obligation for local councils to manage water, and that would need to change for these new entities to do that. And the other was the special consultative processes that would require LTP changes, and that was described as not fit for purpose. It was also, Local Government New Zealand also agreed with that. Yeah, I mean, but the intention is to come up with something which would, I guess, be less all singing and all dancing, I guess, but it is certainly just a guess. But given the pace of change, I'd expect it's going to be very streamlined. Councillor Day.
So my question is, and I don't know if anyone in the room will know the answer to this, but when we joined Wellington Water, when council invested in that or moved into that, was there a referendum? Was there a special consultative process? Do we know what happened?
Your Worship?
Yeah, I can answer. There was certainly a, I can't remember whether it was a special consultative process, certainly a consultative process, but of course at that stage you weren't relinquishing any assets either.
Yeah.
It was merely yeah, this is quite different.
Okay, we've got a debating order. So next, Councillor Pannett, I think you're going to have your moving as a seconder.
As a seconder. So I'd like to thank Councillor Calvert for her leadership on this. As soon as I heard the government's proposal that water would go from council's control, I understood the implications immediately that this would mean massive reform for local government, and I'm sure others saw that too. I am opposed to that. I think local democracy is important. Yes, we have our challenges. We do need some more funding tools. But councillors, do you want me to read out the failures of central government, particularly over the last 180 years? They are very considerable, and I'm a little bit sick of hearing about how difficult and how problematic local government is. It does some, yeah, I'm not going to go through 180 years, but There are some very, very high-profile failures. A quarter of our children live in poverty, hardly something for central government to be lifting its head up. 50% of the population is Māori. Not great. So I think the way I'd understood this, Councillor Calvert, is that obviously we wouldn't be doing a referendum. It would be a national one because it's a national issue, and that getting this information would be to help us understand, to press through all the channels that we have for that, and particularly through LGNZ. It is critical. This is nothing like Wellington Water. We kept control of budget, of policy and assets. This is about giving away our assets again. And I, for one, am deeply sceptical about any central government's commitment to keeping public control of assets. Both Labour and National have sold. I know there are supposedly safeguards to stop this happening, but it is very, very, very dangerous to let go of these assets which basically support life. So I think this is a good one, and I did add those words in around, my other point just simply is that this essentially means the end of local democracy potentially. When you take resource management and water away, there isn't much left to do. Transport, you could say the same thing. And this government, being a Labour government, has centralised without any real commitment, understanding the purpose and the function of local democracy. And central government politicians aren't actually that good at understanding what local government does. They don't generally understand it that well. So I think this is really helpful, and I think it's really important that the local government sector has a strong and coherent view on these reforms. I am begging some of the mayors that I'm talking to take that leadership role, because that is the job of mayors, to do that and to state the value of local democracy.
Thank you, Councillor Pennant, and passionate as always. Councillor O'Neill. I've got an order actually. O'Neill, Fitzsimons, Matthews Day, Kelly, and I've got some words to say. Oh, Condi. I think there is a clarification, Councillor Calvert. Is your amendment a local referendum that we would do to Wellington ratepayers or people that might vote in a by-election, or are you advocating that we advise government to have a national referendum?
I don't think it should be one or the other. The tension of this referendum, the tension of this request is to ask officers to report back. We don't have the answers, and we're trying. And even when we were asking officers, then they thought, but they hadn't had time to investigate. So they may well come back and say, "Look, local government, you can't do a public referendum, but if it's a national one, this is the steps that it needs to go through. But we do need some advice, and this is a way of getting it on the table and getting that formal advice before it's too far down the
okay, thanks.
way."
To myself off. Councillor Fitzsimons.
Yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge a comment that Mike Mendonça made around this being about what happened in Havelock North, and that did trigger this government to look very carefully at what's happening with water infrastructure. And in Havelock North, somebody died because the council failed, and a lot of people got sick. And I'm from Havelock North, I grew up there, and I know people that got sick. And it was a massive failure of the council to provide safe drinking water, the most fundamental thing. And what I've seen since being a Wellington City Councillor is constant failures of water infrastructure. I don't hold on to any notion that we should continue to have control. We have failed miserably. We've failed Wellingtonians, we haven't made proper investment, and this government is coming along with what I think are quite urgent and radical reforms, and they are critical. I'm not convinced at all that a referendum on a massive infrastructure issue is the way to go. I can't even imagine what you'd say the questions would be. This is exactly why people elect people, to make important decisions about policy direction, about fundamental things like water. And I don't at all buy Councillor Pennant's point about there will be nothing left to do. This council doesn't exist for its own sake. It exists to provide the best things for Wellington and the best things for residents. And I'm not too worried about the Wellington City Council as an institution. What I'm worried about is having safe drinking water and water infrastructure that works. And I just wanted to also just finally comment on a referendum. We've already heard advice that a referendum's there's not even a legal ability for a referendum. I don't know what the question would be, but I've heard loud and clear what Wellingtonians think on water infrastructure, and it's that we're failing and we have to do better, and we're already charging them much higher rates this year because of those historic failures to invest in water infrastructure. And we heard advice from our officers this morning that it's very likely that if we're not part of these reforms, there'll be hugely higher costs, significantly higher was the language used, on our residents. So it's an absolute no-brainer for me. We have to engage with these reforms. We can raise a whole lot of issues around privatisation and these other factors, but it is a life and death situation, and we're here because of a death. And to me, we're really failing our residents if we don't take this reform agenda very seriously, engage with it very seriously, but also welcome the opportunities for Wellington, because the Crown is saying we as a country need to do better, and there's nothing special about local councils. There's nothing special about them not being left with anything to do. That's not relevant. We are only here for people.
Thank you. Councillor Matthews.
Kia ora koutou. I think similarly to Councillor Fitzsimons, I think any Wellingtonian who would be watching this discussion would be mystified that we were protecting a turf on which we have so clearly failed them. And that we actually, this came out of the Havelock North thing, but also Wellington unravelling, while this process has been rolled out, and we are getting serious advice from our officers actually that this is a very important, that if we don't engage with these reforms in a positive way, we'll have to do something else, which will be much more extreme and Wellingtons will have to pay a lot more for. So I feel that this kind of turf protection of local government, and as if we're the only democracy in the world, is quite bizarre, especially given our voter turnout, which is woeful. And any kind of referendum that we ran locally, I mean, we only got in by, small percentages of our population, and I don't think that we should sort of think that we will get some great mandate for it from a referendum. It's likely that the turnout would be even more woeful. I also think we need to kind of engage in this process with good faith. And it's still very early. And actually, I think what the government is trying to do is help us. And to kind of be offended by the offer of help, I find to be quite bizarre. And I also think that a referendum is likely to be quite a step backwards in terms of the increasing decision-making power of mana whenua and tangata whenua as proposed in the reforms, and that actually there's a much greater role, and as there should be, and that I think that going to this majority rules again would be a potential kind of failure in terms of the progress that we are making with listening to mana whenua and tangata whenua about the mana of the wai. And I think that it would be a real step backward in that regard. So yeah, I also, to be honest, I don't think we need a working group. I think that we should, it's not like our district plan. This is not our own kind of document. This is about decisions that we make about our engagement in a government reform process. So I'm happy, I mean, obviously we need to do some more work, but I do think we need to be guided by our expert advice. We're already operating in a regional model here, and we are already part of Wellington Water. So we can't act as if those conversations are just happening for Wellington City, regardless of our kind of partners that we already have in this area. So if we have one, I'll participate in it, sure, but I think it is a...
Yeah, no, there's a cycle.
My apologies, I was just conscious of time and wanting to check with the Mayor whether he had to reconvene the council meeting in order to depart, or can we carry on the debate? I think we should carry on the debate. Apologies, Councillor Matthews.
No, that's fine. I was amazed because my corridor was so compelling that you were able to be distracted in that way. So I basically I think that we should be looking at the detail to make sure that we get the best deal for Wellingtonians out of this process, and it's still our people, that will be owning these assets. It's not about privatising them or taking them away from a democratic. And also the opportunity for the public to have their say on legislation and to us directly through this process. And it's not like we're going to do this with no engagement. So, I think that there's some fear-mongering and catastrophising, and actually the catastrophe was the one that we've overseen.
Thanks, Councillor. I know that the General Counsel would like to clarify her comments around referenda and so forth. So, Beth.
Thank you, Councillor Rush. Look, I just wanted to clarify, since I've spoken to you, I've gone back and had a quick look at the Local Government Act. There is an opportunity for referendum, but it's only for small water services, which I believe is defined of 200 people or less. So my view is that it does not apply, but I will actually spend the time to appropriately look it through and provide some advice to you, which I will just direct to all councillors if everyone's satisfied with that. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Right, Councillor Day.
Kia ora koutou. I will not be supporting these amendments. I think it's too early to be talking about a referendum. I think we need to engage in the process and keep talking and working it through. And I have been reassured by some of the responses that we've had back around concerns that communities have shared. And I just want to begin by saying I feel like this is fair amongst people about sharing power, because actually when I look at the structure and the way it's being set up, it's actually really exciting. It's what we've been asking for a long time around Māori participation in making sure that we're actually doing what we're meant to do under Te Tiriti o Waitangi, and it's interesting to see how people cope when that actually is put in front of them. It means that we need to make a change and shift in our thinking, so we actually have to see it from a different perspective. And some comments have been made today around oranga tamariki and MOE, and in this particular situation, we are actually oranga tamariki. We have not been inclusive, and we have allowed decisions to be made without consultation and fair input from mana whenua. So for me, the fundamental structure and beliefs have ignored the rights and perspectives of Māori, and that is why those institutions have been failing. And they are now trying to turn it around, which is what this proposal is actually saying. Let's do it differently. I think also we have to be not too protectionist about bodies that struggle to actually have a proper mandate. We are not voted in on strong numbers, and we have to think about why that is, and maybe actually we're not really able to deliver the things that we need to deliver for communities. And I also do want to comment regarding one of the discussions we had around the mana whenua perspective, that currently the setup that we have means that iwi are working with multiple authorities, and it seems crazy because we're talking about bodies of water and why that transcends boundaries, and that makes it really hard to have joined up conversations. I think it's really important that we lift ourselves out of this and think about what is the right thing to do for the why and also for the people who live in this area. And I have been really encouraged to see that the commentary that we have shared and communities have shared is being reflected back to us around the concerns. Nothing's being hidden. We're very aware what those concerns are, and I feel that they are being addressed. I also am not that sure that a working party is a great way to go forward. I think public workshops are better. I think a working party, as Councillor Matthews said, that works when you're really in the detail and it's our issue that we're trying to work through. This is a much bigger issue, and I think we need to make sure that whatever we're doing, we are engaging in the right way with the advice in a way that the public can follow easily. So I think we should be lifting ourselves up and trying to look at this from a slightly different perspective than some people are at the moment.
Okay, so we've had three consecutive speaking against. Is there anyone that wishes to speak for? Right, well, I will. from my perspective, this is simply asking the officers to see what's in the toolbox in order that our community may be involved. And the loose term of referendum, I think we've just examined that is loose, but nevertheless, what my concern is that we will find legislation put before us with very, very strict timetables, and we will not be in a position to really get a good feel from our community. These are pipes and treatment plants that have been built and funded by ratepayers for 150 years, and they will continue to be funded by those ratepayers. And personally, having expended quite a bit of time and effort in getting to understand the network, I do have concerns, but that's not what this amendment's about. This is simply asking officers to have a look at what is in the toolbox in the event that we might need to look at alternative ways to get feedback from our community. So I will support it. Sorry, I suppose I had to speak then. Sorry, Liz. So, Ms. Kelly.
What's the standing orders? Because how many for and how many against?
Well, there were three speaking against, and that allowed me the opportunity to ask for anyone to speak for, okay. and I did. So we're back into debate.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Kia ora. Wow. Can see the passion around the table to receive information. So I will be voting against this amendment. I think that we're jumping the gun from all that I've read. It's the early stages. The officer's advice seems to support that this is the early stages. And I think that item 4, note that further advice will be presented to the committee in September 2021, says it all for me. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Kelly. Councillor Condi.
Yeah, just to say, I think I agree with most of what's been said, that I think this amendment is really just a bit of a nonsense. We do have people coming back. We do have more advice coming back. We don't have a referendum in the toolbox, and it just feels like the amendment feels completely unnecessary as well. We know that we're getting further advice, that staff are coming back to us. I think you could have done this in an email. I'll be voting against it.
Councillor Free, Deputy Mayor Free.
I will support this, but I don't know where we're going. But I do think that we're only at the minute asking for the steps required. It might be that when that comes back, we find out that it's actually not a practical thing to do. What I think we need to realise is that this is only the beginning of a massive program of local government reform. And this is probably the least important thing. Actually, the pipes, if they work and they don't cost too much, who cares, to be really honest? If the water's of good quality and it's not polluting the environment and we're not paying over the top for it, who cares? But if it doesn't work, it's a big deal. But what is coming is the RMA reform, and that's really going to impact on the things that we take for granted that council does. And let's get too distracted on this, because the RMA reform is going to be even bigger.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. And Councillor O'Neill is the last one on the speaking list.
Thank you, Chair. I am strongly opposed to the amendments brought out here today. It's no secret and it's no surprise that the value, just the preliminary numbers for this reform is ranking at $185 billion. There's no way that local government with the current structure, having need to respond to a national infrastructure crisis and a fresh water crisis, will be able to compensate and do things by themselves. We constantly debate at this table all the time that that central government delegates us enforcement and regulatory powers without the tools to do so. this government is prepared to invest $185 billion in water infrastructure. I'm concerned by the multitude of failures, and I'm a strong supporter of localism to its finest, but we know through national policy statements we have failed on biodiversity, we have failed on the MPS on freshwater, on the MPSUD, we have failed to provide enough housing for our people, and so I think we do need national direction and strategy. It has been clear through a multitude of papers that this government has released that local, that we are, sorry, I jumped the gun on one of my points, now it doesn't line up. The New Zealand government has been very clear that in a number of papers that this is about elevating the rights of Māori and Te Mana o Te Wai. Our own investigation showed that through the Mayoral Task Force, our local iwi have lost faith in our council and regional council to provide adequate water management. Sarah, I just wanted to briefly touch on your point because it may have just been taken out of context, but when you said who cares, I'd like us to think of our neighbours out in Pōroro, at Pōroro City Council, and the deficit and the infrastructure costs that they're facing, and how many people have suffered from a poor lack of, every year, election on election, we talk about, out there the discussions are around Te Tahi Bay, and not, people can't swim in our beaches, people can't fish for food anymore. We are in a crisis of food security. Our eastern suburbs are in a security of fresh and accessible water. As another councillor said, I think it was Iona earlier, that water does bring life, and if we do not protect it, that should be our number one priority. And so lastly, I'd just like to bring in the perspective that, come on, like even if Wellington thinks that we're big enough and tough enough to do it on our own, we should think about our siblings just around the bays, because they are also needing regional buy-in and a network, and that is where I think our strength is as a local authority that looks to a regional approach and not just our own backyard.
Good. Well, good debate, folks. So, right a reply? Please keep it short.
Well, there's been so much said, and Councillor Neal, I agree with you. We should be thinking about our as we currently do. It's just not, I don't think we should be thinking about the whole half of the country. There's some comments being made. I mean, it might come down to, do we improve the water for Wellington City, or do we improve the water for Havelock North? This is the sort of thing this entity is going to have to come to grips with. Thank you, Councillor Pannett. Yes, local government, we do need to have a strong, coherent view on these reforms, and local democracy is really important. We can't just pick and choose whether it's water or it's not for some other areas, or vice versa. It is about local democracy and localism, which I'm pleased to see many support. And yes, it was terrible that someone in Havelock North died, and a number of people got sick. We have people dying on our roads through our roading infrastructure. We have people dying through not having sufficient housing, poor housing, cold, leaky homes that haven't been fixed. So the arguments that have been made do not, are not just solely in the vein of local water reform. Deputy Mayor Free, it is really important, water. As Councillor Pan has said,
who delivers it?
It is, but it's not just delivering; it's making sure that it's fit for the future, and we ensuring that our Three Waters infrastructure is fit for the city and the future plans for our city, and our place within the region. A public referendum was comments about a public referendum. As we saw from officers, they need some time to think about what that actually would mean and to do. And that's all this amendment is asking for, is for officers to go away and tell us what can be done and what is the key steps. So all it is clarifying information. The other amendments all about noting, just bringing some information to the fore. I know one councillor mentioned, well, we're still at the early stages. Yes, we're at the early stages, but there's only 8 weeks. This government is working at pace on this for some reason. and we need to make sure that we are well prepared. So asking for some information up front will help us be better prepared. That's all. It's not making a decision that we should have a public referendum. And look, I appreciate the passion being spoken, but I have to say, this is this is a Labour Party policy, and I've heard some very strong views from people in the Labour Party from this. So I just hope we don't have any conflicts of interest happening here.
Okay, folks, look, I've had a request from someone for a comfort break, so what I propose we do is we vote on the amendment, comfort break, 2 minutes, and then we'll do the substantive. Okay, so what's the magic words? It's now been moved and seconded and debated and amended. Please vote.
So that is carried.
That's carried. Thanks. Good debate, folks. Okay, 2 minute break.
exact same set of reforms. And so I think that we really need to keep that. We're in the situation where we all know we cannot promise to our community that we won't have another major pipe failure this summer, right? We can't. That is an urgent crisis. And I think that it's very important for us to put that back into that context. So it's important when we're thinking about these 3 water reforms that we're not comparing them to the status quo, because the task force says the status quo is not an option. That's what they said unanimously. The task force said the status quo is not an option. It has failed. What the task force said is that if we didn't go with the central government reform, that we would need to do our own reforms, which would do pretty much the same thing. We would need to transfer our assets to Wellington Water. We would need to make sure that Wellington Water were able to have their own source of revenue. We would need to separate our balance sheet so that they could borrow more extensively. All of those things are exactly what these water reforms are doing. The only difference that we have between what the task force was proposing and what we have in front of us is an issue around scale. All right, the task force didn't have a view about whether it should be the size of Wellington Water or the size of half of the North Island or what it should be. But the DIA have done extensive work on that, about what the appropriate scale is for these. And what they've found is that if we were to do these reforms at the scale of Wellington Water, we would not get the efficiency gains. We would get much fewer efficiency gains than we would get at the scale that they're proposing. That's why they're proposing 4 entities, because that's the size and scale you need to get the efficiency gains. And these efficiency gains are real. Scotland has been on this journey, and they have realised all of these efficiency gains by doing exactly this. So I think, we need to be aware that this is essentially what we have in front of us. As far as I'm concerned, the government's proposal is exactly in line with the mayoral task force recommendations, which were unanimous. Now, I acknowledge that there are still questions to be answered. We still have questions that we need to understand how these things are going to work, and these are questions that were brought up by the mayoral task force again. The mayoral task force talked extensively about, in the case of reforms like this, how will the community have a voice in the strategy and planning? How will the community be confident that they'll have transparency over what the water entity is doing? This is still an issue that we need to work out. The task force talked extensively about the boundary between a water services entity and the TAs who have responsibilities for land use. We were really concerned about how will we incentivise TAs to make responsible water-sensitive decisions when they're looking at land use, so that we aren't just flicking the cost off to the water services entity. That's still an issue that's live, and that we need to have a conversation about how we're going to sort that out. Councillor Foon, you brought up a really good issue about how we're going to make sure that climate goals are prioritised. I think we're really covered on the freshwater management stuff because the MPS freshwater management covers us there. But in terms of carbon zero, that's an issue that we need to figure out how that's going to work. And we certainly have an issue about what is the effect of this going to be on our finances at the Wellington City Council level. And we don't have an answer to that question yet either. But all of that is stuff that the government have said they are working on, and they want to talk to us about it. Awesome! Let's talk to them about it. We've got a whole bunch of ideas. We've got lots of thoughts. The task force certainly had lots of thoughts. So I think we're really doing a disservice to all of the work, people who donated their time to this city to be part of the mayoral task force, who spent a lot of time, months and months, who worked on that report, who worked really hard to come to a unanimous report. That did not come easily. I held the pen on that. It was not easy to come to a unanimous view on that report. I think we're doing a disservice to all of those people and all of that mahi when we start dragging our heels on these reforms. This is exactly what the task force said we need to do. Are there more issues to sort out? Absolutely there are. Absolutely. But what we need to be saying to the government is we are all in. This is what is needed for the reforms in our country, and now let's work together with you to sort out the remaining questions that we've got. That's the basis we need to be going forward for the government, and I hope that that's the basis we can continue to work on, because there's no doubt in my mind that this is exactly what the task force required us to do. One of the things that I would note, talking about the task force and where we found the failures to lie. And look, we were really deliberate when we wrote the task force report. We didn't want to be all about blame. We didn't dive into who did what wrong. We just tried to say what went wrong and what fixed, and how do we fix it. But I want to be really upfront that the only person that I know of who was on the mayoral task force who was not surprised by the fact that we were not spending all of our depreciation was Jeff Dangerfield. Jeff Dangerfield is the chair of Wellington Water. He is one of the members of the professional board of Wellington Water. And he knew that we were not spending all our depreciation, but that message wasn't getting through to council somehow. So this model is exactly that. There will be a professional board, and they will have control over their revenues, and they will be able to make sure that all the depreciation is getting spent. Our professional board at Wellington Water have been doing their job. They've been doing a fantastic job. Where it's been breaking down is where that comes back to council. That's where the breakdown has been happening. So this model around having a professional board that's appointed by representatives from mana whenua, representatives from local government, is working in Wellington Water. That's not where the problem was. The problem was here. And the reforms are gonna be taking us in the direction we need to go. So I just thank you, everyone. I thank all the staff who are doing a lot of work. I know there's a heap of work that's going on, a lot of conversations that are going on, but I just think it's really important that we as a council are engaging with this reform in good faith. And Councillor Calvert, I'm not a member of the Labour Party, and I have no intention of becoming a member of the Labour Party. And the water reforms started, yeah, actually I think Port of Water, I think that was a bit offensive, Councillor Calvert. Could you withdraw and apologise?
Sorry, first of all, it was speaking out of turn while Councillor Condi was speaking. So at a minimum,
I apologise.
That was disrupting the meeting.
Okay, I apologise.
I'm guilty of that from time to time. Thanks.
Apologise for
Thank you. You know, this is not my view on a political view or a political trying to advance. And I would note that actually the Three Waters reform, a lot of that started under national. This is not, the national government knows as well, this is a massive issue for our country. It is an urgent crisis. It needs reform. And I think we need to be doing our part to make it work. Kia ora.
Thank you, Councillor Condi. Anyone else want to speak? Councillor
Oh, well, sorry, just using
Councillor Young, that is disrespectful as well. Please, Councillor
I don't need her to withdraw.
Please, Councillor Paul.
Fine. That's fine. Yeah, anyway, I just wanted to, well, I had to contribute given the nature of some of the kōrero. Personally, I am not a fan of centralisation, and I think there was lots of talk about the treaty in the previous amendment, and Te Tiriti, and I just think, you know, that was signed between Ki Ngā Hapu, Ki Ngā Rangatira, not, you know, these big regional bodies, and I worry that this is a step away from localised solutions, and I think the centralisation of infrastructure and resourcing is at the crux of a lot of the issues that we face nowadays. I don't think there's any one, I think we can all agree there's no one fixed view from Māori, obviously, and I'm not suggesting that there is. And of course, I'm open to listening, but I worry that this is just creating a superstructure for hapu and iwi to defer to. I worry about future governments and makeups of those and the actions that they'll have with this power in their control and these assets under their control. I worry about accountability mechanisms and people being able to hold to account the people making decisions about our water, and I do think that this contributes to the same thinking that has contributed to a lot of the problems that we have nowadays. I can't really see how people, you know, we've got the Wellington Water kind of regional structure, and people are saying that we might be able to get some solutions by taking a further step in the centralisation direction, but I'm not convinced that taking a step back into a more local approach isn't, I'm not convinced one is stronger than the other. I think there's been historic underspending in lots of different areas by councils, and I think as they become more representative and diverse, that the decisions will become better and have more of an equity and future-focused lens to them. I think it's hard to say whether councils or government have contributed more to water, especially given that most of our rivers in this country are polluted as a result of resource management legislation, which is the government. And I will always advocate for a localised solution as opposed to a centralised one, because I do not have faith that the Crown will be able to take those concerns seriously. And it might work down here in this region, but if we look at like the central North Island and upper North Island configurations of this reform, there are actually hundreds of iwi in those areas, and there is no way that you can guarantee an equal voice at the table for those people. And I would also note that the DIA 3 water reform meeting that was down here in Wellington had 3 people attend it. So there's a serious issue here in terms of engagement and people being heard. So look, I'm not taking any fixed stance at this point. I know it's still early, but I think we need to have the conversation about centralising as opposed to localisation.
Anyone else? No one else? Councillor Foon. Bye, Ms. Kelly. Vote for me. Just vote. I'll show you.
Then I'll go quick.
You take. Everyone's allowed.
Thank you. Kia ora. I'm for progressing these conversations, absolutely, but I guess I want to question ourselves that are we going the right way? Are the millions of dollars we need to spend on this infrastructure actually the right way to progress to circular initiatives, which is really the only opportunity we have to try and work within the planet systems? And we can't deny that the growth that's going on, that what is happening around the world with changes in our weather is resulting, like our friend from Ngaio demonstrated to us today, like we heard over the storms that are happening in Whero, like we're seeing happen in Scotland. The system is changing and we can't continue business as usual, and we need to rethink and we need to enable trials of systems. And so how do we initiate or support initiatives that are not about using more water, in fact harvesting rainwater? For example, if our new business district became a circular economy district where we weren't using pipes at all. And so I guess this system, I'm concerned that going to the scale and size does not have any driver for those initiatives and those trials to take place. So one thing I really want to make sure is that our council is strong on our feedback to the government, that is what we want to see progressed as this idea goes through. So yeah, Singapore's collecting stormwater, 40% of the current water, and supplying 40% of the current water demand. And we have to get real. We can't carry on the way that we're carrying on, and that's going to take trials, supporting initiatives that don't work on the balance sheet or gain revenue. And so how do we do that? That's all from me. Kia ora.
Thank you, Councillor. Deputy Free.
Yeah, I guess I didn't explain myself very well when I said who cares about water, and actually we do care. But I think I was trying to set it in the context of there are actually some pretty serious issues here, and this is just one of many. And this is really about centralisation and about central government making more decisions and local government making fewer. And so my perspective was really that water is just one thing, and you know, of course it does matter, but there's some really big issues here. I think that I really endorse the kōrero that we've heard from you, Councillor Paul, and you, Laurie. I think there's some really good, Councillor Foon, I think there's some really, really good, important questions that we need to raise. And around what I would say is, why is 4 the right number? What sort of size, if we are going to go to more of a centralised model, what is the right size? Or, you know, and how do we stay nimble? Because it's up to local government to actually respond to the local conditions, including our local growth, our local geography, our local climate. And can we still do that with a big, when we're part of a really big authority that stretches right from our top of the South Island right up to Gisborne, really different climatic conditions there. How can we support our region and whatever group that we're in, while still meeting our own needs and being fair to our own ratepayers? You know, has there been enough work done on the compensation that might be paid to us? the more I think about it, the more I'm glad we did vote for an investigation into some kind of referendum, because the public will have important questions to ask as well. And that's why I don't support a small councillor working group on this. I think we've all got perspective which is valid, and we'll all have different questions. What we really need to be working on is what is it that we don't know, because we will be in a position to have to deal with whatever comes. And the more that we've been able to frame this and shape it before we have to actually get a final result, the better. So, I mean, obviously this is just a scoping paper. There's not much decision we're making at the moment, but the useful thing is the discussions we've actually been having. And I look forward to having more of them.
Okay, shall I do my right of reply? I will do it very quickly. Yeah, so, you know, today was not the day to argue substantive issues around the water reform, but I think it was really helpful to understand some of the perspectives that I've heard. This is big. It's right that we are heavily engaged, and I've lost my notes. Very quickly, I mean, yeah, things are the status quo, no good, but we are taking really good steps, and I've got myself in a comfortable type of position with Wellington Water. You know, so I've got a bit of an issue here about moving from the status quo now to something else which undermines all that. But nevertheless, this is just to receive information. Let's carry on the kōrero. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for patience for those who recognise we've run over time. Let's vote. To the gods. Might be in the gutter, but I'm looking at the stars. Right, thanks. So we've got two other agenda items, folks. It's the forward program and the action tracking. So, Mike, can you introduce the forward program? I have to say, I allowed things in the first paper to perhaps go a little bit longer, not expecting the second paper to take so long, but I'm learning. I know, Rebecca, I know. Mike.
Oh, councillors, these are fairly straightforward, and I think the papers speak for themselves. Thank you.
Any questions, any debate?
They need to be moved and seconded, and they can't be voted on together.
Is that an amendment or a debate?
Well,
I have a mover from Deputy Mayor, seconder from Ms Kelly, and I have a question from Councillor Pannett.
Sorry, Mr Mendonça, can you just tell us what Tēnako is about? Just so we're just coordinating, because we're going to approve the framework through the Planning and Environment Committee, and just wanting to know what that one was about.
I'll come back to you, Council. That's not till October, so...
Might be a report back on Central Library, perhaps.
Okay. And then the earthquake-prone buildings, what were you wanting to achieve there?
So that you might recall we were looking at constructing a database of more detail. Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Okay.
Just on Tēnako, that'll be a report back on the Tēnako framework and the projects that are within it.
Sorry, hang on. Have we got this right? Because we are approving the framework. Yeah, and then you'll do yours afterwards. Remember the order, just so that we're actually, anyway, we can line that all up, but let's just be coordinated.
Okay, Councillor Condi.
I had a question. Stormwater. So during our chairs meeting, we requested a paper about how our assets performed during the recent storm, and we had conversations about that today. We had a public participant come in from NIO to talk about it. So just Mr Mendonça, when are we going to be able to see that on the forward program?
Actually, Jennifer, we had actually made arrangements for that to be on the 9th. I don't. Yeah. Do we need to do an amendment for that? No. Yeah. We'll be coming on the 9th.
Thank you.
Good. We've got a mover, we've got a seconder, no other debate. Let's vote. Try and get this right this time. Good. Last agenda item is the action tracking. And I think, Mike, you're going to talk to that. Well, it speaks for itself, does it?
Again, I think it speaks for itself. We're happy to take any questions.
Any questions, Councillor Foon?
these are actually about amendments or resolutions that happened way back, and one of them was around the business case for the sludge minimisation plant and trials of composting toilets. Where have they gone? I'm happy to take the information later if that's helpful, and when will they be coming back to council?
So sludge has become a whole work program in itself, so we are coming back to you with some advice on that. The composting toilets, I'm afraid I can't answer off the top of my head, but I'll come back to you with a response on that.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? No. Any debate? No. I will move the action tracker plan. Councillor Day will second. Let's vote. Do we know on to vision? And that's carried. Okay, so I will declare the meeting closed. Are we going to say a closing Karakia, or we'll do it with the... Do that. Yeah, okay.
Right. Thank you, councillors. Do people want a couple of minutes or straight into it? Okay, we'll go. That's fine. Okay, so I am going to resume the council meeting, and I'm going to move that pursuant to the provisions of the Local Government Official Information and Meetings Act that we move to exclude the public from the parts of the proceedings which we are discussing, which is around asset acquisition. The reasons are there, section 272(1) and sections 48(1)A. So I'm going to move, seconded by Councillor Pannett.
No.
Councillor Paul. Any debate?
Yes. Actually, I do. Oh, sorry.
And
very briefly.
can I just make it clear that when you are debating the reason, you must not divulge the reasons that we are going to be discussing.
I'm very familiar with that ruling, thank you. I don't consider this necessary, just given what we're discussing, so I'll be voting against. I think we need to have a really strong commercial reason. I don't think this cuts it. Thank you.
Can you vote, please? Thank you. We'll turn the cameras off and then we'll quickly go through that.